It's prediction time in Chicago. The 53-man roster is set, and with that in mind, we can finally predict dadgum win-loss record, as well as who's going to lead the team in yards, what's going to go on defense, and everything else to do with this 2023 season. Nick and I are going to take it away right here on Bear With Us. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Us. I'm Robert Schmitz, the editor-in-chief of DeBears blog. He's Nick Whalen, works for Football Guys, and has coached for pretty much his entire life. Nick, how you doing as we start talking about predictions?
I'm good, man. This is going to be such a fun pod. One, because I don't know exactly where you're at. I know we're both, Bears fans, but I think we're also realists. So it's going to be fun. I have a ton of data, and I think this is going to be a really fun show for people to listen to. So I'm excited.
Ooh, you've got data? Tell me, what kind of data are we looking at?
I have a ton of data because I like to play poker. I like because there's always going to be multiple layers of factors. Like
Right.
poker, it's not just your hand and the odds of hitting more increased odds when the flop and fourth and fifth street
Right.
come out. It's what did my opponent do last time? How big is my chip stack? Where am I at from the
Right.
dealer? All of these things are factors in the NFL schedule. I have a ton of things. So let's just start with the easiest one
Roll the
first.
ball.
Okay. So I don't like strength of schedule based on how people did last year because so many things change. But I do like Vegas's win-loss record because they get paid a ton of money to not be wrong with the win-loss record. So they have the line Chicago 7.5 right now. So in terms of that, adding all of that up, I got a lot of this from Sharp Analytics. I know people probably follow Sharp. Here's the strength of schedule based off of that win-loss record from Vegas. Chicago is the sixth easiest strength of schedule. I'll just go through the division just so people will know. Detroit's 11th easiest, Green Bay is 14th, and Minnesota 25th.
That's tough. That's tough for Minnesota. I mean, I'm excited. I can't help but think that this is about one of the most wide open NFC Norths that I've seen in like 5 years. And
Oh yeah.
it helps the Bears that they get exactly that little bump. But we got to talk through the teams that are on that win-loss record. And do you have more data, or are we going straight into
Oh, I've got a ton of stuff. At some point, you might want to cut me off. So, okay, does strength of schedule even matter? Right? I know sometimes it's doesn't matter. So here's a stat last year.
give it?
6 of the 7 teams with the easiest strength of schedules made the playoffs. 6 of 7.
Dang.
Only 2 of the bottom 7 hardest schedules made the playoffs. So that sounds like a very significant factor to me.
Right.
This one, I don't know if I've never even considered this until I read this article about this. And I was
Uh-huh.
like, this makes a lot of sense. So, I know we have these Thursday night football games all the time, and it's kind of bad football, right? Like
Right.
guys are tired, they're beat up, they're not healed yet, they're not prepared, whatever.
Right.
And all of that is determined off of rest. So, another analytics thing that has been calculated here is the net rest. So, the neutral rest that a team gets versus their opponent. Chicago is tied with 2 other teams for the NFL lead with plus 12 net rest versus their opponents in 2023. Okay, now again, does that matter? Last year, 3 teams had negative 10 net rest days or worse.
Right.
Green Bay, New England, and Houston. All 3 fell below their projected win-loss total. 2 teams were plus, I believe, 12 in their net rest days. And that was Detroit. Man, Detroit had that big run at the end of the year. I wonder why they kept winning games. They were more rested than their opponents. And Buffalo, who crushed it last year. And that's without even factoring in Buffalo's game that didn't count, too. They still hit the over.
Right.
So net rest sounds like it factors in, right? Here's a little bit more data for you. And then we'll go over some more of this. Last year, teams that had 3 or more net rest days, more than their opponents, won 57% of their games. After week 13, when teams are more tired because the season's going on, 55.2% of the time, the team that had more rest won. So rest sounds like it's really significant. The Bears have a ton of
They
rest.
do. Now,
Yeah.
those, if memory serves, because I remember an infographic on this from like what, February, March, this is a while ago. The Bears do get like 6 of those rest days or something. Like they get a huge amount of rest from their bye week.
Yep.
Basically, most people are positive in net rest for exactly that reason. So I think it
Mhm.
was what, 3 games in particular where they are plus rest over their opponent, and then one where they've just got a ton of rest.
Yep. Yeah, no, you're correct, and actually, I'll go through that when we go through the win-loss schedule just so we're
Mhm.
and then so here's also something that's interesting, I feel like. So in the last 3 years, Chicago is 0-9 when their opponent has more rest than they do.
Mhm.
But this upcoming season, Chicago is the only team in the
It's
NFL
never,
to not have less rest than their opponent.
never at
So
all, which is crazy. That
yeah,
part I remember now is really bonkers, where
right.
Chicago has all kinds of schedule-based advantages, almost as if, not that we need to get into this, almost as if there is a higher power that thinks that it would be
Mhm.
ratings gold if the Bears made a push for the playoffs. And you know what?
Mhm.
I'll take it.
Oh,
Like
yeah. 100%. Yeah. And just looking at the division, so Chicago's plus 12 net rest days,
Right.
Detroit is plus 1, Green Bay is 0, and Minnesota, they had that magical run last year, they're actually -2 net rest
Oh
days.
man, that's tough for everybody else. And again, a lot of the
Mhm.
Bears' big total in net rest comes from one really sweet game, but I'll take it all the same. And we've got more data, don't we?
Oh, yeah. So and this gets me a little bit more juiced up just and these are not maybe all total net rest days, but I
Hmm.
think time matters. So let's just look at the division games, okay?
Right.
6 division games. The first game, there can be no net rest advantage because it's the first game of the season.
Everybody's
Everyone starts
rested.
when they start. But they're at home as Jordan Love's second NFL start, which I think is an advantage. Now, there's 5 games left in the division. Every single one of those, Chicago has a net rest advantage of somewhat. So I'll go through them
Seriously.
quickly. At Green Bay, end of the year, Green Bay plays Sunday night football the week before, Chicago doesn't. Minnesota, they play at home. Chicago plays Thursday night football the week before, so they get that extra, what, like 3 days of rest. At Minnesota, Minnesota plays Sunday night football the week before, Chicago doesn't. And then Detroit home, Bears have the bye week ahead of time. And then at Detroit, Chicago has Thursday night football the week before and
Right.
then plays Detroit.
Does
So
Detroit
all the
not play? I guess Detroit doesn't play on Thursday. That's a huge advantage for that game in Motown. Oh my
Mhm,
gosh, that goes understated. Because from a game planning perspective, look, I think rest is awesome, right? But it's a funky word when it comes to football, because what I think we can forget about sometimes is that, as I understand it, everybody gets off Monday, and that's your ice bath day, that's your
yep,
professional masseuse day, that's your trainers day, as you try to just rest out, like, what, recover is the better word, when Allen Robinson suddenly looks like he's, because I remember that video of him showing us how he recovers, and he looks like he's been in a car crash like on Monday, as he's going through all these ice baths to get back in football shape.
mhm,
You pretty much have to do some of your game planning, your positional meetings from the ice bathroom when you're playing on Thursday night football and you just got out of a Sunday game. And say what you
mhm,
will about professional athletes, people can only pay attention and focus so hard. Like you're saying, it's why a lot of these game plans can be so thin. But for the Bears, the fact that they get that whole week coming off of Thursday night football with Carolina is massive for a divisional game that, if you don't mind me saying it, Nick, they shouldn't win. Like, if that
no,
game was true neutral, you should
yep,
lose that game. At
right,
home against Detroit, are you kidding me? But a sloppy turnover or two flips a game on its head, especially a dome game for somebody with Fields' foot speed. And I can't help wondering that one in particular, because not only, okay, so I've been watching a lot of baseball lately, which has not been
okay.
great for my heart and soul because the Texas Rangers are just losing
Ah,
constantly.
I
But
I'm a Cubs fan, so things are good here.
it got me thinking about these relievers that'll enter high leverage situations. And so a game like that kind of rest advantage, is a high leverage game. Because how much does it really help you to get a rest advantage over a team that you were probably going to beat anyways? May help seal the deal, because
Mhm.
any given Sunday. But as neat as that is, it's overkill, right? That's exactly the kind of game, though, where if that evens the stakes and suddenly the
Yes.
Bears come out on top, you're stealing wins out of
But
what could have, maybe should have been a 6 or 7 win season. Suddenly you could be as many as 9 and 8 and
right.
squeezing your way into the playoffs.
Let me get you a little more juiced up just for that Detroit game. I told you I had a bunch of data, and which is funny because I'm a film guy, but I like all this stuff. You
You
have to
need to
dabble
be.
in it.
You need a balance.
So this at Detroit game that we play Thursday night football against Carolina the week before, right? Which is
Hmm.
home Thursday night football. You have to travel,
Hmm.
so you're going to recover a little bit more quickly. Detroit plays at the Chargers. Okay, so that's a little bit more travel
It's a lot of
at
travel.
3:05 the game before. So they get 3 less hours and they have to travel. And the Bears have that Thursday night football the game before. So I think that's a much bigger rest advantage than people can think about.
And for as many people as would out there and say, you guys are on crack, like, why are we spending almost 10 minutes now talking about this? Think back. There's my favorite Bears example of this was when the Chargers in 2019 came to Chicago and mercifully failed to do nearly anything, but could not give the game away enough for Chicago to actually win. If everybody remembers, that was just this awful game. Phillip Rivers and the Chargers offense looked terrible. And why? It's because East Coast teams, wait a minute, West Coast teams, God, I get that mixed up too often, Nick. It's embarrassing, are awful at noon when they have to travel, because
Mhm.
to them that's as early as 9 or 10 in the morning and their bodies simply aren't ready for it. Apparently the record, basically anytime a West Coast team has to travel more than 2 hours through time, it's just awful, especially early in the season, which, Nick, that kind of stuff plays into your schedule. Yes, of course,
All
injuries
of it.
matter. Who's to say that when the Bears visit Minnesota in week, what is that, 12, right before their bye, that
Mhm.
either team looks anything like they do on week
Right.
one simply because
Yep.
of injuries? But rest and prep go into everything, which is
Yep.
part of why, I mean, if anything, I think it's what makes week one so interesting, because both teams have some serious new pieces to hide what they would want to do on offense. What does the newly expanded passing playbook look like for Chicago? Because it should be there. Well, we don't really know yet. What is Jordan Love going to focus on? We may have a guess, but we don't really know yet. Plus, he's playing with all kinds of rookies. That is going to be a bizarre ungame planned week. Like,
Oh yeah.
the coaching advantage, whichever way you think it is, because I'm not about to declare that Matt Eberflus is or isn't the equal of Matt LaFleur. You can make that decision for yourself, dear listener. But the coaching advantage gets a little bit muted in a game like that, because you kind of have to walk in with your game plan over a well-tailored game plan against the opponent, when, as well as you think you know them, there's just so many questions on offense that you won't see answers, best case scenario, until halftime.
Right. No, I agree with you. I have one other quick
Give it to us.
stat, and then let's get into it because I think I don't
Right.
lose anybody. I just think this stuff is fascinating. So one score games, right?
Oh, the
Chicago
Bears
was
were
in
awful. Weren't they 1-7?
1-7 and one score games. And you have to think those they have to even out. Everyone talks about Minnesota winning a bunch of those last year. Chicago's on the other end of that. The Amir Smith Marset, fumble, the drops in the end zone, the Economia St. Brown dropping, the non-interference call on Claypool. Like you had all those things in. A lot of bad luck happened. So you think those even out. And I'll give you actually one more quick one.
Yeah.
Last year, Chicago allowed 4 touchdowns that were not by the defense. They had a punt block, Miami returned for a touchdown. They allowed a kick return for a touchdown. They had an interception return for a touchdown, and they had a fumble return for a touchdown. Chicago scored 0 touchdowns that way.
Right.
You got to think that's got to even out
And what
over
was
time.
really crazy to me, so you mentioned the 1-7 thing. Obviously, the Bears went 3-14. You got to lose games somehow, right? But what blew my mind, Nick, watching those games, okay, let's call a spade a spade. Justin Fields and the Bears built one of the most diverse and authentic rushing attacks that the NFL has seen for an awfully long time. I would probably have to go back to either, I mean, not really 2022 Detroit. They have a lot of things that they try, but they aren't as successful, I would say, as the Bears rushing attack was. I'd have to go back to Lamar's MVP season, where he helped kind of create a similar effect inside of the Ravens offense that they weren't able to imitate in years going forward. Knock on wood, because I hope that's not the case for the Bears.
Mhm.
I hope they're able
Right.
to imitate just as dangerous a rushing attack. But you would expect that in these late game scenarios, Nick, the Bears' passing offense was just the death of them and that they had no way to move the ball. But I remember all of those games, and in all of them, it was not the passing offense itself's fault that the game ended the way it did. Like Emir Smith Marsette's, we've all been through this, but we're going to go through it again. Emir Smith Marsette's fumble. In the Detroit game, there's this knee on knee moment where Cole Kmet is about to spring wide open, wide open for like a 30-yard gain, but he and the inside linebacker go knee on knee, and Fields can't quite curl the ball back far enough. It's that 2nd and 10. The Bears fans, if you go back to it, looks like Fields tries to pull the ball back down, but can't quite in time. The All-22 shows Cole Kmet about to be wide open. Instead, he gets hurt. You have the Mooney bobble right in the end zone. But the play before that, Dante Pettis drops a ball that hits him stone in the chest. Like, you can go through all these games. The Bears were moving the rock. The Claypool game, is that the same one in Miami where Equinemius St. Brown drops a gimme that hits him in the hands? Like, on 4th down? It's so goofy looking back at these late game scenarios, because I would have expected the Bears didn't have the tools to have a chance in most of
Right.
those games, but they did move the ball. I was there. We all
Mhm.
watched it.
Yep.
And and it's just bizarre because, like you're saying, you'd think that the ball would swing back the other way. The ball has a habit of not lying. I mean, the better team won in most of those cases, but it is bananas thinking about how a couple plays the Bears way, and they probably are realistically, Nick. Okay, heart and soul, I'm gonna put you on the spot. What record do you think that that team deserved?
Last year,
Yes.
I would say 4 or 5 wins.
I would say I would put it at 5.5. Just
Yep.
my heart and soul. I think that Justin Fields had squeezed out enough points in a lot of those games to where a defensive stop one way, because I swear the defense never, like, if Fields did take the lead late in the game, the defense would give it right back and create
Yep.
another clutch, gotta have it situation.
But as a true tanker though, Robert, I was okay with
Oh,
it.
it's
I
totally
was
fine.
like, you know, because I loathe Green Bay. Like,
Oh, yeah.
loathe Green Bay. And when they were up in that game late in the season, I was like, okay, guys, like we need to find a way to lose this one.
So
That's what I was thinking. And I loathed Green Bay. And
So-
I don't want them to make the playoffs, but I still had that mindset.
I don't want to go there. We're not going to make this conversation. But I will say, to me, Nick, I don't know if Luke Getsy disagreed with you, because it sure felt like with a bunch of screen calls and rushing calls, the Bears were waiting around for Green Bay to get back in the game
Mhm.
right after halftime, as if somebody made a phone call somewhere. But we don't need to go there. I'll tell you, the hardest part about being a film analyst or trying to take football seriously is when a team is as bad as the Bears were last year, because I think it calls everything into question. Where you sit there, I had people asking me nearly every week, well, Robert, what do the Bears do to fix their defense? And I was like, they need better defensive linemen. Like,
Oh my
you
gosh,
just
yeah.
can't win with this. And it'd
No.
be like, well, so what schematically could you do? And it's like, seriously, not much. You don't
No.
have nearly any matchup advantages on the defensive
Mm.
line. And I've actually been pleasantly surprised, by the way, with what specifically Justin Jones and Andrew Billings did in the preseason. It's the preseason. Who's to say it matters? But when they get one-on-ones, they do win a play or two, which, say what you will, they didn't last year. The Bears'
Nope.
defensive line. And you just need, like, I'm not asking this defense, I don't know how you're feeling, because everybody will talk about the Matt Eberflus defenses that he was able to basically rise up from the dead in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And I look at those rosters and I see a lot of underrated players. Like Kenny Moore hadn't blossomed yet. And
Mhm.
we look back and we go, okay, well, who was that guy? And it's like one of the best nickel corners in football.
Right.
But
He's good. Yeah.
it's like Danico Autry, for instance, is a better run defending, also a little bit of pass pressure edge than people give him credit for. I'm talking about all the kinds of guys that if you talk to Colts fans, they would tell you that those players were pretty good. But Grover Stewart wasn't a household name until 2021. Even then, he's not really a household name. Even so, Nick, I just need the Bears to not massively lead the league in touchdowns. They allowed 57 touchdowns. They allowed more points than anybody else, and they only faced the 24th most offensive plays. So they allowed the most points, and they faced a below average number of plays. This is not a good pair, Nick.
Well,
This,
I have
yeah,
some worse stats for you if you want. I mean, 32nd in points allowed per drive,
yep,
32nd in third down percentage. They
yep.
just allowed people to convert. 31st in yards allowed per play.
Yep. And I mean, seriously, sometimes I
Man.
would swear that the only reason that that came down was because of how often they got to 3rd and 1 and teams just lined up and pushed the ball over the end. But so it's bizarre. Not really, because Arizona second on that touchdowns list, 51 touchdowns. So the Bears were 6 touchdowns ahead of second
Yeah,
worst.
yeah.
The Bears need in the worst, so to one more statistic before we finally get to some actual predicting. In case any Bears fan is out there listening that has needed this statistic, a lot of people will point to Fields being terrible, despite the fact that the wide receivers were awful. We all knew this. The offensive line was not very good, and the Bears scoring total wasn't bottom 5, but it was 23rd. If you look at points per drive, Nick, it's higher than that. So the Bears were 19th in points per drive on the offensive side of the ball, which I find incredibly interesting because to me, the fact that that's higher than their points per game reminds us the Bears didn't actually get as many drives as a
No,
standard offense because the
no.
defense took too long to get off the field, which
Yep.
again creates this interesting story of what would the points per game have been if the Bears were given the same amount of offensive chances as other teams, and
Mhm.
or now that they've got better receivers, because the Bears were, I think, below average in explosives last year, but again their talent wasn't great. And
No.
I mean, if we because we're in the name of being honest on this show, I know you are. I really work hard to be. So if I ever sound like a negative Nancy, know that I'm not happy about it either. This Bears
Mhm.
offensive line right now is probably not as big of an upgrade as Ryan Poles was hoping it would be. Just
Nope.
with the questions surrounding Nate Davis, Tevin's already hurt. Darnell Wright has missed a little bit of practice time, which, you know what, for rookies, every single week is critical. Every
Mhm.
single game rep matters. And you know they wanted to play him on week 3 of the preseason. They didn't get the chance to. So whatever he was going to look like then, he's going to have to look like live against Rashad Gary. It could
Mhm.
be a rough couple first few weeks. I expect Wright to be a easy candidate, Nick, if we're being realistic, because a ton of people are going to talk about how improved Fields is. There's a chance Fields trots out the exact same skill set he did last year and still pops 45 more yards per game in his passing
Oh,
purely
yeah.
because of the wide receivers around him. We can say that out loud. I hope he takes an extra step and ends up at like 210, 215 with 35, 45 rushing yards per game. This would all be awesome. But when I look at Darnell Wright, I think that from week 1 to week 18, he has a real shot at being the Bears' most improved player. But that means the offensive line to start the season could be a bit of a weakness, which affects the win-loss totals a little bit. But moreover, Nick, as we get into predicting, I think the scariest part that I look at this schedule and predict is that starting with Green Bay and then going to Tampa, who has a very aggressive defense with a very aggressive defensive line, then playing the Super Bowl champions, and then coming back and facing one of the biggest question mark teams in football this year in Denver. I think that there are a lot of people who are going to be really focused, a lot more focused on Fields' first 4 weeks than his next 4 weeks. Fair or
Oh,
not? And
no.
if
Yep.
Fields throws for 1,500 yards weeks 5 through 8, people may get back in the game. But 1,500 yards is a ridiculous total. Do you get what I'm
Oh,
saying?
yeah. Well, yeah, I think I just saw something from Jonathan Wood. He posted that the year 3 breakouts that I think we're all envisioning, the Jalen Hurts one, the Josh Allen one, they've all started year 3 hot. And if he doesn't do it through 4 weeks, maybe give him a couple more weeks after that. If he doesn't start hot there, it might be, okay, this is who he is. So I think it's super critical. Now, he faces some decent defenses there. They're not all, cupcakes. I know that has a factor in this, but it's time for Justin Fields to put up at this point. Now,
Oh, yeah.
you added some more stats though.
Hmm.
So that means I have to add more stats because I love this stuff.
Please.
When things changed in week 7 with New England, right? The whole offense
Right.
changed from week 7 to week 16 because week 17, there was no Mooney, no Claypool, and Fields was injured, and he didn't play week 18. From 7 to 16, Chicago averaged, and that's also with the one start with Simeon against the Jets. The Bears were 12th in offensive points per drive, which is
Ooh.
significant. Justin Fields had a QB passing rating. We're not talking about QBR, not his rushing, passing rating of 98. If he just maintains a 98 with better weapons, with should be a better O line, don't know how much better, but should be better.
Hope it's better.
If he just maintains a 98, breakout season this year.
Oh yeah, but again, I think that word breakout season, man, I thought it was a lot cooler when I wasn't a film head. Because there's some of this stuff where people talk about something like it's a breakout season. Okay, I'm going to use a silly metaphor. It's like when you find a really sweet song by a local artist and then it hits the popular radio a year and a half later and people tell you, "Man, have you heard this new song?" And you've been like, "Where you been?" There's an element of that when it comes to Fields. Like if let's say Fields sticks exactly where he was, because I thought he was playing really solid quarterback against Philadelphia and against Buffalo, and that the team wasn't living up to task. If he does that, then there are going to be a lot of people saying, "Wow, Fields looks a lot better," and it'll be like he looks no
Yeah,
different. But I'm happy you think so.
yeah.
Like,
He kept progressing. Just turn on the tape.
yeah, exactly. And so the people are craving win-loss totals. Let's start at the top,
Yeah,
then we'll
let's do
get
it.
granular. We'll talk about each game and then we'll talk about some superlatives at the end. I
Sure.
like to divide these things into what I think will happen and what I hope will happen. I hope that with all the rest advantages that you talked about, and with a couple penalties kind of going the Bears' way, as well as a couple favorable bounces of the football, the Bears go somewhere between 9 and 10 and 10 and 7. 10 and 7 is like the dream number. Look, I would love for the Bears to win 10 or 11 games, but I feel like the team is just a little too young. Tyler Scott's going to need to make some plays here and there, and he's going to
Mhm.
biff some plays because he's a rookie. He's going to line up in the wrong spot, like we just saw him do in preseason game 3. He's going to drop a football. He's going to do this or that. We don't know. He'll miss a block more than likely. I feel like Tyler Scott would be the guy who'd miss some key block on a crack toss
Mhm.
play on third down and end up with a loss of yards. And people would be like, Luke Getsy's an idiot. Everything we've seen before. But
Right.
so I think the Bears are bang on 7.5. Like maybe even I hope the ball bounces the right way and they end up an 8-win team, but I could easily see one more cruel bounce the wrong way because I'm a Bears fan. I've basically never had good things in my life. And so as far as the heart season that I am preparing for, my benchmark is you can't lose 6 games. You can't lose, or whoa, you can't win only 6 games with a
Right.
full season of Justin Fields and have me be content with it. Like,
Mhm.
there's a wide band to me of how this team could perform. But as far as acceptability standards, somebody gets fired. Whether it's Alan Williams, whether it's Luke Getsy, whether it's Justin Fields, or a combination of a lot of these. If the Bears only step up from 3 to 6, I've got a problem. But other than that, I am happy to sit back in my chair and watch whatever happens because it's football and the Bears they look like they've got the tools to be an NFL football team again. And that's awfully fun. How are you feeling about this season?
Well, so we obviously have this biased lens, I think, that we can look through as Bears fans,
Right.
even though we do look into the film more and you think of like, well, look at all the additions that they made. Well, every team makes additions
Right.
every year, even Minnesota's like, well, yeah, we lost some guys on defense, but look at Marcus Davenport, like
Right.
you can
With everybody.
shift things to make it positive for you. I do think you could make an argument that every single position in Chicago, besides maybe fullback and long snapper, will be better in 2023. Even we had talked about things bounced the wrong way in 2022. Even Cairo Santos make an extra point, man, and
Yep.
things are different against Detroit. So I think you can make the argument that everything is better. But when I dove in and added all those stats and the rest and deep random scores. Like I literally rewatched the whole season. I watched this season 3 times. I forgot Miami blocked a punt, returned it for a touchdown, and
Yep.
we lost by 3. I was like, we should have won that game. Like,
Right.
and that was Miami when they didn't have the Tua concussion stuff going on. And I was like, man, like we were in all these games. We had no business being in these games with a terrible defense. I will say it, a terrible pass blocking O line and
Right.
30th or worst receiving crew. And that's not what we're going to have this year. So, my realistic heart of hearts, I don't see us on the under of 7.5. I see it
Get it,
8 or 9
Get
wins
it,
is
Nick.
where I see it. Now, if things hit, because things could hit. You talked about the Colts defense and how they overachieved, is kind of what people would say. You get some of the things in place and we have better health, maybe you could maybe get to 10, 11. Who knows how it works out? But that's about where I'm at right now, 8 or 9 wins. And then let's go through the schedule. Okay.
Yes, and I
We'll
want to.
talk through it a little bit and then we got to talk through some of the other stuff. So
And if you don't mind me saying it, I just
go
want to
ahead.
jump on and say, I think after the last 3 years, Nick, I am just about heartbroken. Like I can't do faith anymore. I was there with Trubisky, right? I was in that trench, ready to prove everybody wrong. And then in 2020, I got in with Foles. In 2021, I was ready for Fields. In 2022, I did see it coming. So that one didn't break me nearly as
Right.
badly.
Yep.
That was actually great. It's
Yep.
more like I want to be, I hope, if I'm hitting this right, I sound like it, the most positive person that's also saying, show me. Because do you know how big of a smile I will have eating any crow I'm served if the Bears win the division as a 9-8 team or contend for a wild card spot, whether they come up short or squeak into the playoffs? Like, all that would rule. I would love it. The stuff we could make, like the breakdowns we could put out, not only would people want to watch them, they would be fun to talk about because the Bears would be a flat out fun football team
But Robert, add on top of that 2 first-round picks.
next year.
Now, all the salary cap space we have, people want to come to Chicago because they see what's building. Like
Right.
everything goes on top of it. So if you get that momentum, now you're at the
Be
top
so
of the hill
good.
and you just have the roller coaster and boosh, it just goes right downhill.
It'd be
Easy.
so good. It'd be so good. And I think after specifically the 2020 season, like the 2019 season was bad and a lot of us didn't
Yep.
see it coming. The 2020 season was soulless. Like it just felt terrible to me watching that
Yeah.
whole team. And I think after that one, I want to see the defensive line prove it to me. Like I just talked about how I'm relatively upbeat about what Justin Jones and Andrew Billings showed us, and I am, but I also like let's go through the game to game because you'll hear me probably say it a lot where
Sure.
having disadvantages. Do you mind if I talk about week 1?
Yeah, Green Bay. Let's go. Home
The
against Green Bay.
Bears have to overcome the fact that I don't know how they're going to create pressure with their front four, especially if David Bakhtiari, because honest to goodness, no voodoo doll intended, I didn't actually think that Mr. Glass was going to get to week 1. I mean, I was just ready for Bakhtiari to get hurt again, right?
Well, he's
If
still not there.
is he not in practice or is he just not there?
He hasn't practiced the last 2 days. Now they say precautionary. It's been rumored he's not going to play any games on turf this year.
What? Well, Lambeau is grass. So,
Right.
no, wait. So is the Bears.
Well, how about this? Before you predict the Green Bay game, I'm going to give you a couple of injury things that we'll talk about in our next
it.
episode.
Go.
We'll have our game preview. But Rashawn Gary is reportedly going to be on a pitch count. So we're not going to get a
Right.
full-on Rashawn Gary that game. And Romeo Dobbs, who I actually like him. I think he's a
I
decent
do too.
player. He's got a hamstring injury right now. And his week 1 game against Chicago is in doubt. On top of Bakhtiari, we'll see what happens there.
Well, I can't help but think that this entire season, this first time I'll say it, and I'm going to try to keep it to only saying this 4 times. But this entire season is borderline cinematic. I don't know if you could write a movie script better for a trial season for a quarterback because week 1 starts off with a game against the team that we hate the most, and their offense should struggle. It would be
Yes.
weird if they don't. It would be borderline masterclass by Matt LaFleur, and it would be disaster class by Alan Williams to let a receiver room with, to your point, one healthy player, or not one healthy, but like one healthy, experienced receiver in Christian Watson.
Experienced.
Yeah, he's a second year. I love Christian Watson. I think he slaps. I think, honestly, I still think, Nick, that the Packers are better set up for the future than Bears fans will want to admit. I think, and I'm public saying this, that Jordan Love is going to get all of the blame for the different things that rookie and young receivers do wrong. And then, would you believe it? If Aaron Rodgers plays 65% of his snaps, Green Bay also has 2 first-round picks.
Yep.
And man, wouldn't it be easier for them to just draft like a Quinn Ewers, like that guy that sits every year in the like 9 to 12 region, like a perfectly good toolsy quarterback that might need a year. Like you let Love ride things out as a bridge starter and you start him the year after that and your cap room is clean. It makes too much sense to me. This is the Bears' best shot at punching Green Bay in the mouth, but they ain't going to win the game if Justin Fields and the offense don't lead from the front, because this team isn't built for the defense to win them games. Would love to see it. The defense at its best should be punchy, should be scrappy, should get theirs back, but they'll give up plenty, like over the course of this year. And
Well, I would argue Green Bay set up the same way. They're built on run, which their offensive line is way better pass blocking than run blocking, but they're built more to run the ball. I do like both of their backs. Play action, hit Musgrove. Play action, hit Watson. But as you talked about with young guys, they're all young. They don't even have
they don't have a third-year receiver.
Sammy Watkins guy to teach them how to watch film guy in the room.
And it's on purpose. They did this on purpose, which to me is ridiculous. Like, I can't help but think that it's not like Randall Cobb would have been it, but they go to the huddle. Who's going to tell them, besides the wide receiver coach, where to do what, right? And we'll see how much veterancy matters, but I can't help looking at this game. Man, I think it's a true toss-up. Like, it helps that it's in Chicago, but part of me just has been little brothered by the Packers so many times, that Tevin Jenkins being out has me pretty freaked out. Partially because, Nick, when you look at this Packers defense on paper, the talent level is disgusting. Like,
no, I'm gonna say no.
Fight me.
Here's what I'm upset about. Okay. N'Keal Harry's a former first-round pick.
Yes.
Look, Laquan Treadwell's a former first-round pick. That's all we hear about. Darnell Savage is trash.
Oh, I don't like Savage or their safeties. I think their safeties are terrible.
They might be the worst in the NFL in terms of safeties. Eric Stokes isn't playing. Rashawn Gary's on a snap count.
Right.
Devontae Wyatt has looked bad in the preseason,
despite
being a first-round pick.
I'm holding on to my priors with Wyatt. I'll admit it out loud, Nick. I thought Wyatt looked awesome in his college tape. I look at them and I see Kenny Clark. I see a very, very good Preston Smith edge 2, very good edge 2, if we're on the same page. And
I think he's a decent player. Yeah.
A Rashawn Gary that can hurt you. But hey, countering myself, Rashawn Gary's coming off an ACL. No way. He has the burst that he has in week 8. Like,
he's
let alone week 18.
For a week right now.
And practice is one thing, but that body just can't have it. Right? Elite players like Khalil Mack, their 85 is NFL level. So you'll see them come back from injury earlier because they can hang at NFL level despite having a hand tied behind their back. But I look at like Quay Walker's fast side to side. Jair's not going to be easy to go up against. And I don't know, Nick. I mean, it is crazy to me how many resources the Packers have spent on their defense, but I didn't start that conversation to say the Packers defense is amazing. I think Joe Barry has done an amazing job of squandering the talent that's on that defense year after year after year. Now they're doing more stuff up front. So I've always seen Barry as a throw it at the wall and see what sticks guy. They don't really have a philosophy so much as they have a patchwork of random ideas. And they run a bunch of exotic coverages to intentionally try to be confusing. And in my opinion, their defense would be better if they just lined their guys up and played. Right. So hopefully they don't do that.
Right. Well, and there's two things. One is we can't spend 10 minutes on every game. We're not going to get through this thing.
I want to.
Well, I know. But the other thing I want to say this is Quay Walker was bad as a rookie. And that whole defense is not good against the run. None of them. Kenny Clark has been regressing.
It has to be, to your point, Nick, it has to be a culture thing. Like, I'm not going to say that about many defenses. They've got guys that can stop the run, right? They just don't.
No.
You know what I'm saying?
And they like to play too high too, which hurts your numbers. But Quay, if you want to look at what Quay Walker could be, they're hoping at some point, even though he didn't come in the NFL at the same age, you're hoping he's going to be a Tremaine Edmonds. That's the type of he is. He's like this
Right.
athletic guy who's good in coverage, but he's bad against the run. And Edmonds had that big jump last year, even though he's probably like maybe a year or a year and a half older than Walker. But and also you mentioned the Georgia thing. None of those Georgia guys have really panned out yet. If we're thinking about this, Jordan Davis, and we
And
keep kind of going through.
it's such a nightmare for draft
Mm,
analysts too, because you're
mm,
watching this tape where these guys look objectively good and then they graduate to the NFL level and you're like, well, obviously I knew support structure mattered, but what on earth is happening here? Right?
yep.
But like you
So,
said,
so, anyways, week one,
mhm,
who's winning?
I have to take the Bears because to me, I think that the Bears' entire mental like stability hinges on this game. Maybe not literally; they're probably mentally tougher than that, but they got to be thinking it too, right, Nick? That they just lost 14 games. You want to purge the stink of a horrible season? You roll out week one at home in front of your home crowd and establish yourself.
Yep.
They have to win this game,
Yeah,
right?
and I other things we've talked about this on previous podcasts. I have them winning this game. We talked about the injuries. That's going to hurt them a little bit too. We talked about how young they are, and both of their specialists are rookies. It's their first NFL game. I think Green Bay is going to make too many mistakes. Jordan Love's second start in the NFL. You don't think Eberflus and Williams are going to put some exotic
God,
things
they
he
just
hasn't
have. I
seen.
hope
He's
it's
had this
exotic. If they
he's had this
run,
pretty pocket in the preseason. Oh, look how good he looks in the preseason when nothing matters. You don't think they're gonna have some zone blitzes? They're gonna stunt some things and mess with things. You don't think Eddie Jackson's gonna bait him? I just think that there's too many young guys that have to do well to beat Chicago. So I have Chicago winning week one. How about week
if
two?
week two at Tampa, the defense has to come through. I think they win this game, but they could lose it. Like a strip sack can completely flip this one, but I don't believe the hype in the renewed Baker Mayfield. We hear this every year with any team that is taking a quarterback off the reclamation pile, especially a quarterback that's now on what his fourth team. Like I'm pretty sure he is what he is, and that's okay. The Bucks' weapons are sweet, but Jalen Johnson doesn't get near enough credit. And I think if Mike Evans was able to outspar Jalen, this matchup, honest to God, Nick, might flip a little differently. But I think Jalen's better than the current Mike Evans, and that's big because now you've got Chris Godwin that's coming off of his ACL injury. You've got a talent, or you've got a Bears defense that should be able to contend against the passing game and a Bears offense that, again, this is totally just my hope, but they should be able to score probably 20 points relatively reliably so long as Fields' hamstrings stay intact. How are you feeling about this one?
Well, I like Tampa's defense a lot better than their offense. I
Oh
mean they
yeah.
have they have Vita Vea, they have the D tack from Pittsburgh went there, the quick guy, and Cansey. They have
Is Cansey
still some
healthy?
good.
Because I know he got hurt early.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, they still have good linebackers. They signed Jamel Dean, who I wanted Chicago to sign. They
Hmm.
still got Winfield, so they have a nice structure there.
They've got a
But then you
great
look at
defense.
what is bad with Chicago's defense: run stopping. Tampa Bay's running back room is not good, and they just lost their center, which is really sad news.
Brutal.
I think it was Ryan Jensen for the
Hmm.
year, and that's the basis for everything. Yeah, I like Christian Wirfs as well, but if you're not going to run the ball in Chicago, I'm not going to be afraid of that team. So I know it's on
And
the road, it's at Tampa, but I'm going to give Chicago the win.
And this is going to sound so hokey, but so far it has held true that defensive coordinators are not doing well against Fields the first time they see him. The book isn't out yet on how you stop Justin Fields, and that speed keeps surprising people. So, as aggressive as Tampa is, it's just going to take one blitz where they send Devin White on a suicide blitz and Fields squeezes out of the right side of the pocket, suddenly gets vertical on like a 34, is he? Year old Levante David, and he may be off. And again, in a game like that, Nick, one rushing touchdown from distance can tilt the game in a massive way. So
Oh yeah.
let's get to week three. Do we need to talk about them playing Kansas City?
Not really. At Kansas City. I mean, no, again, we talked about this before the pod started, but all of these games, it's not like 100% this has happened. There's a range of outcomes. Okay. So like there's a chance that Chicago can win every game. There's a chance that they could lose every game. And for example, last year Chicago beat the 49ers and Kansas City lost to the Colts. So there's a range of outcomes to think about
Totally.
here. I think of the range of outcomes here. Let's just go with Kansas City wins that game at Kansas City.
Makes too much sense. And then they take on Denver the week after that at home. How you feeling about the Sean Payton Denver Broncos?
So I'm going to add in these stats as we go. So Chicago plays home against Denver. Yeah, Sean Payton's there. Who knows what's happening with Russ? Now, they played at Kansas City at 3:25 the week before. So while it's not a huge rest, it's 3.5 hours
Mm-hmm.
in the road. I'm going to give Chicago the loss against Denver.
Mm-hmm.
Good defense. I think Sean Payton is a pretty good offensive mind. And also, just in terms of just odds, I think Chicago's going to go on a 2-game losing streak here.
So I'm going off of anecdotal evidence here. I don't have anything that proves it, but in my experience, aging quarterbacks fall off as the end of the season approaches. I mean, I remember back to Favre's late years. We've seen it a little. No, I can't bring up Brady, but we've seen it with Manning in particular, where in that last Super Bowl season, he started to kind of fall apart. So did Phillip Rivers. We're still in September. No, we'd be just early in October, and Russ shouldn't be there yet. And I
Okay.
tend to think that, like you're talking about, the Denver defense, look, I'm not sour on the Fangio style. I love the Fangio style of defense, but I always get worried around year 4 of when a defense gets popular, right? Like this is the
Mhm.
point when offensive coordinators should be putting their heads together on how to beat this Broncos
Yep.
defense, but that really won't kick in until like week 10, right? The Bears are catching the Broncos at the wrong time. It's okay to say it. And
Yep.
after what we hope are 2 early season wins, they take 2 losses. I bet it's close. I bet even that we come back to this podcast, at least I hope, and say the Bears could have won that game if, I don't know, Trent Taylor hadn't dropped that punt or
Yeah. Yeah.
something
Yep.
like that. You know
Right.
what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep.
But we'll give them the loss as we go to Washington. What happens there?
At Washington, I'm going to give Chicago the win. I think they avenged the loss from the previous year. Chicago this is a Thursday night football game, by the way. But they played at home the week before. So, that helps a little bit that they didn't have to travel so they can rest up and then travel to Washington. They don't have to travel home and then, they have the Thursday night game. So they have a little bit more rest, I would think, on an average Thursday night game. I don't trust Sam Howell. I mean, I think there's a lot going on with that Washington team. They have a really good defensive line. Yep, I'll give them that. But that's week 5. Tevin Jenkins could be back by week 5, and that's a great thing for playing Washington.
I think, Nick, we should go all the way there. We're a smart football podcast. We've brought in rest days. Let's bring in a little more. The
Okay.
Washington Commanders are softly tanking. It's very obvious. We knew this because Ron Rivera didn't get fired, because there's a change in ownership coming. Washington beat writers at late last year opined and whined about how they knew no change was coming because everybody was going to the house was going to get cleaned as soon as the ownership transaction finally happened and the new owner came in and got to make their mark. Sam Howell, as a quarterback, is not serious. But unfortunately, Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, Montez Sweat, and that D-line, they are
Chase Young.
they are gravely serious. And honest to goodness, I think that makes this one a toss-up, especially because they're playing it in Washington on a low game plan week, like Thursday night. So that's just line up and play ball. And man, Fields just about died. There's a hit that I think Jonathan Allen delivered on Fields' knee when it was fully extended as he was driving a ball downfield that I still can't believe his career survived. Like,
Right.
it almost feels like a borrowed time kind of hit. So I look at this and I think it's going to be another sloppy, messy, ugly football game. I think that what Bieniemy and the Commanders offense could put together may overcome Chicago. But if you told me, crystal ball, that Chicago was able to hang 17 points on the Commanders, I think they take the win home. So it's just a matter of how you feel by that. But to keep
Yep.
things, because I know I said I think that they're going to win 7, let's give this one a loss because I don't know how many of these we're going to
Ooh,
have.
okay. We're different. I got one. You
We
got
got to
lost.
be
Okay.
different. We got to be different somewhere.
Sure.
Then
All
we
right.
then we welcome Minnesota. How you feel?
I have this as a win.
I knew you would.
you know, because Chicago played at Thursday night football.
Right.
the week before, they get extra about 3 days of rest here. It's a home game, and the Vikings, they're gonna pass the ball, I feel like 700 times this year because that's what they're geared up to do with Hawkinson and Addison and Jefferson. The running game isn't that great. They don't run the ball a whole lot. That defense, there's basically 3 guys that I know on that defense. And I know a lot about football. The corners they're gonna put out there is worse than what Chicago put out there late in the season last year. They have a couple of draft picks that can't even get on the field. Louis Sion and then Andrew Booth, the corner from Clemson. They can't
They
even
don't
get
look
on the
good.
field, which is kind of embarrassing. I know there's some injuries going on, but still, like that's a very talentless defense. And you want to put Brian Flores out there and he's going to be super aggressive with it. Well, you can be
Mhm.
aggressive when you got Jair Alexander and whoever else matching up on your receivers. You can't be aggressive when there's holes open in your defense. So I think that one could be a blowout.
I have known Flores to be a blood from stone kind of coach. Those Miami teams gave him next to nothing, and he delivered results anyways. But like you're saying, this Minnesota defense is going to be a real test, especially because I just don't know how well cover zero is going to blend against a mobile quarterback like Justin Fields. It blended very well against Lamar Jackson. So that's not great news. But it, if the blitzes don't get home, or if Fields can work his way out of them, especially because the Bears, I would argue, like to move the pocket a little bit more than Lamar and Greg Roman's attack did. It's a weird offense that they've had in Baltimore for forever. I think there are a lot of toss-ups on this schedule, man. But I do think the Bears get this one. At least I do. They've got too
Mhm.
much. They're coming off. You said they're coming off Thursday night, right?
Yep.
I think
Yep.
that's just too much of an advantage, especially
Mhm.
in an in-division game where the Bears are going to have a lot of things going their way. It'll be tough to stop Justin Jefferson, but this one, Bears score 23 points and they're probably over the hump.
Well, and it's a home game.
Hmm. Exactly.
So, I mean, you had all that together. Okay, next game is home against the Las Vegas Raiders, which still never sounds right coming
Nope.
out of my mouth, but whatever. That's the team and where they're playing now. Um, the Raiders play at 3 o'clock the week before. So Chicago played at home, played Minnesota, the regular routine, played at home again, and the Raiders have to travel from the West Coast and they have a little bit less rest than Chicago does. I have Chicago winning that game because I think the Raiders are going to be one of the bottom 4 teams in the NFL this year.
You said they were going to win 8 to 9 games, right?
I have not, yeah, yeah, 8 or 9.
Do
Yep.
you have like a massive losing skid coming up? Because you're already at 5, aren't you?
I'm 5-2 right now. Yep.
I
Five
think
and two.
I think that when I go through the Raiders roster, I really like a lot of the players they have, but man, there's 2 names that jump out at me. Jimmy Garoppolo, who, while good, is good in Shanahan's scheme, and Josh McDaniel, who Nick, like I was a McDaniel guy because I was like, surely he grew from the last time in Denver. It does not feel like he did so far through one season, and I can't get there, right? I can't get there. But
You didn't pick Alex Bars as your one guy? I thought that would be for surely be the one guy you
I
thought of with the
know,
Raiders.
but like I just see those 2 names and I think your quarterback, like I think Devontae Adams obviously rules. I think Max Crosby is a game changer. Like we don't need to just go through the top end players, but the Raiders roster is decently constructed. It's just man, their quarterback he might be, for all I know, Garoppolo's going to come here and he's going to have one of those Osweiler games where he just picks apart cover 2 and
Oh,
cover 3 because
don't
that's what
do
the
that.
Bears offer him. Like a lot of this season really does depend on what Alan Williams and Matt Eberflus bring to the table. It can't just be base cover 2, base cover 3. But the preseasons are always kind of like that. So that's not weird that that's what they did. I'll also give the Bears the win here because it just feels like it, but they get some weird games coming. I could easily see any of the ones that we've talked about, by the way, just about. I could see them having just a down game, like a goose egg game
Sure,
that they
yep.
lose. And so
That's in the range of outcomes we talked about. There's always this range.
exactly,
Yep,
I think my current record has them at 4-3. They
yep.
could be. They like. I totally see you're 5-2. 4-3 feels right at this point in their schedule, but 3-4 could happen, especially because they're coming up against, I think, one of the most confusing teams to ever talk about, and that's the Los Angeles Chargers in Los Angeles. A game that I think you'd agree with me from a talent perspective, they should probably lose this, but the Chargers can make a habit of losing games that they should win.
Yep. Yeah, it's been very interesting with Brandon Staley there and his decision making. It hasn't worked out perfectly. He was going to bring in that Fangio scheme and hasn't quite worked out. He didn't have the personnel. Also for this game, again, I'm going to bring this up every time. It's at Los Angeles and they play the Chargers. They play at 3:25 the week before and Chicago does not, but Chicago does have to travel. You got your time zones there.
Is
I have this one as a lost. And I'm not going to add a lot in there. We'll just say it's a
Were the
loss. And
Chargers away the week before, or were they at home?
I don't have that on me.
That's okay. I do think that makes a bit of a difference, just as they travel, get back used to the time change. But I'll probably give him a loss just because I'm trying to keep things sane and level. But this is a game I could easily see slipping away from the Chargers. Justin Herbert is outstanding. The fact that the Chargers have been so poor with Justin Herbert as their quarterback for this long tells me that I just don't know how fixable it's going to be when Quentin Johnston, their first round pick, who I like, is getting out competed in camp by somebody else. Like, everybody's going to view that as this positive thing because it's quote unquote more about the season that the other guy's having than Quentin Johnston. But man, if your additions don't even add, like,
Right.
when does it get better? And
Yeah.
what, Keenan Allen's not going to be his age forever. Like, Austin Eckler is pretty much at odds with the team itself. Like you're saying, it feels like a team where the arrow's pointing down, but I'll give him a loss because that keeps us sane. You know what I'm saying? No, I'll
Yeah.
give him
Well,
a win. I'll give him a win and meet you where you are. I think that's more fun.
wow. I mean, that's a team that's been injured like at a historically crazy rate, like every year. So
Every
at some
year.
point you think the Chargers would be healthy, but that's the other part of this
But
factor.
that exact conversation applies to their next game as they go into the Superdome. Tough place to play against one of the oldest teams in ball right now, who, if they're healthy, I think this is a clear L. But if we get half of the Saints, I don't know. How do you feel?
So I have it as a loss and kind of what you talked about. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like Dennis Allen, the coach. Dennis Allen defenses are top 10 defenses, like
Mm-hmm.
for a
They're
long time.
talented too.
Yep,
Like,
yep. And then you add in, and I know they're old, but Carr with they got a few running backs. They've got Olave, I like a ton. And yeah, I know the salary cap is fake crowd with New Orleans. They've lost pieces. They've
oh yeah,
lost
they've
Marcus
been
Williams.
bleeding.
They lost Teron Armstead. They've lost a lot of pieces, but they still win. I have this as a loss because that's a good team, but also Chicago plays the Chargers the week before on Sunday Night Football and New Orleans plays at noon. So that's a bit of a rest. Now again, the NFL doesn't qualify it as a rest advantage unless it's a full day, but that's a chunk, and I'm going to give it to New Orleans because they're at home.
And they're going from East Coast to back in their time zone. Like, there's a lot of pieces to this. I also think everybody underrates Carr. We hate Carr. And I don't think Carr is near as bad as a lot of people seem to. And you're
Nope.
giving Carr an outrageously good receiver. Like, Chris Olave is a house that Chris built kind of receiver, in my
Mhm.
opinion. And so he just had Andy Dalton chucking the pill to him. And did he win Rookie of the Year, or did he get hurt?
He
But
he should have won Rookie of the Year, and he didn't. But if you look at a lot of the analytics, he should be. But also, the one of the best receivers of the recent era is also on that team. He's just been injured a lot. If
Michael
Michael
Thomas.
Thomas can stay
Mhm.
healthy, that changes the whole dynamic of New Orleans.
I tend to agree with you. Then they move on to one of my favorite games of the year because I don't know why Carolina, and this one's at home and it's on Thursday night. These parts I know. I don't know why Carolina has been getting so much national attention. It's a team that, yes, it's fun, but they've got a rookie quarterback starting, and we're not going to get into his weight. That's a conversation for not now. But like, we're talking about a rookie quarterback. We're talking about some terrible receiving weapons. Like, your rookie wide receiver in Jonathan Mingo might be your best option, and even then, like, it's not Christian Watson. Like, Christian Watson may have 1,100 yards. Mingo, I think at his peak, probably peaks around 800, maybe 750, something like that. Like, reliable wide receiver 2-3 blend, like a better Equinemius St. Brown. I don't hate Jonathan Mingo. I just couldn't believe he was taking top 40. That's my 2 cents on it.
Oh, 100%.
Um,
100%.
Their offensive line had a really great stretch last year, especially run blocking, but as a pass blocking group, they've never been great. And then their defense has some pieces, but man, I hate saying this because I love Brian Burns, but I'm going to ask you to shoot from the hip. If you were going to rank edge rushers, roughly where does Burns fall? Because I don't quite know if he cracks the top 10. There are some aliens at edge rusher. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right. I mean, yeah, he's on that fringe. I would say like 8 to 12.
Hmm.
And anyone could debate that.
Anybody could debate that. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, they've got Derek Brown, they've got JC Horn, they've got the guy whose name Jeremy Chin.
Jeremy Chin.
Like they've got some sweet players. And the defense that they're going to probably attempt to run, again, it's that Fangio style. Not everybody's going to implement this well. Like it feels to me like the Bears line up and the Bears are the better team. And it feels to me case closed. But
Well, it's rather easily the Bears are the best team because it just I like the coaching staff Frank Wright brought in there in Carolina. That's one thing advantage I would give them, but it feels like they're like duct taping this team. Like here's Miles Sanders, here's Hayden Hurst, here's Adam Thielen or the ghost of Adam Thielen.
right.
Here's DJ Shark who's hurt already. Here's Jonathan Mingo. Like man, they're just trying and spending resources, and these guys aren't even that good. And you add in, and I like Bryce Young a lot. I like him in terms of his character and his poise. I mean, a lot of Tyson Bagent back there. He's just super calm, and he's got some good experience. But I think Chicago is easily going to win this game. But also, if you needed another thing besides them being at home, Carolina plays at 3:05 the week before. Chicago plays at noon. That's an advantage.
Man, this is making me higher than I should be on a season where I'm really trying to temper my own expectations because then they go into the Detroit game we talked about earlier. You've pretty much talked me into that one being a win, especially because every podcast I listen to very patiently reminds me that the Detroit Lions in that 8-win stretch that they had turned the ball over. Do you know how many times, Nick?
No,
4 total times in 8 football games. They were remarkably clean as far as a football operation goes. And while you look at their roster, and Amon-Ra St. Brown rules, who's the second receiver that pops on that team? Like, I'm not a Lions hater, but you have Jared Goff, who's shown that he can throw the snot out of a football, even if defense reading isn't exactly his jam. You've got Amon-Ra St. Brown that rules, but he better not get hurt. Like, if a horrible specter of football disaster somehow took every receiver in the or every team in the NFC North's wide receiver 1 away, the Bears would suffer the least, which I don't want to say makes them injury proof because we love DJ Moore, but the Bears have depth at receiver that I don't think a lot of the rest of the NFCN has, right? Like it's helpful
no.
in these
No,
kinds of
I mean,
divisional games.
well, you also have to add in this is after the 8 games. So Jameson Williams, in theory, would be back at
Sure,
this point. So that's an advantage. And I like him quite a bit. But Khalif
I do
Raymond, I mean,
too.
he's a solid guy,
I
not anything special.
I loved Jameson Williams' college tape. I haven't heard a positive report out of Motown about Jameson Williams. Not one time. I mean, I was at the combine, Nick. I got eviscerated by Lions Twitter for this, where somebody asked the GM, whose name escapes me at the moment. They asked him the most
Brad
softball
Holmes.
questions. Yes. They asked him the most softball question that they could about Jameson Williams. They said, "What's it like having Jameson Williams? Does it make you feel like you got an extra first round pick?" And he went, "Yeah, you know, Jameson's got to be accountable with what he's got to be accountable with," and so on and so forth. And it's like, I don't know what's going on in Detroit right now. But maybe if James Williams isn't the impact that they think he is, they're going to need a ton out of Laporta. And rookie tight ends historically never produce. Like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm going to give this one a W. Clearly, we're going with the hope theory just because I'm either going to have to falsify some losses or I'm going to end up way over my own win-loss record. But the rest thing is just too much, assuming the Bears are even remotely healthy. They have a lot of advantages in this game.
Yeah, they have a lot of advantages here. The one thing is that besides the Bears playing on Thursday Night Football the week before, and Detroit's on the road in LA playing at 3:05 the game before. Detroit is at home. Chicago is on the road. I'm going to make this one a loss. So right there, you're wondering where this
Go
comes.
for it.
That's
Go for it.
3 out of 4 losses I have for Chicago
But
there.
man, we go back to that week 17 game, and it's like Detroit ran an absolute hot load of man coverage, which would be great if the Bears didn't have DJ Moore on the roster. And so
Yep.
if number 2 can stay healthy, you won't be able to do that. Or they'll
Well,
try and they'll just get stood up.
you
Plus,
can add in Mooney, add in Claypool as
yeah,
well. Neither of them were available that game either.
neither of them were there. And so
Yep.
if one of them makes it to that game, you've got 2 decent man beaters, and I'm not convinced Fields isn't going to be faster on turf. Like, who's to say? I mean, that's the turf that he got injured on, hit that one, and then Atlanta's field. So maybe there's
Yep.
some of that too. But
Mhm.
I don't know, man. Like, I could easily see that one going their way and Lions fans in shambles. But a lot of that's because I see the Lions as a real regression to the mean candidate, which sounds insane because
Yep.
they didn't have a winning season. But
Well, no,
e-
I do too, because I mean that offense, Ben Johnson's the hot name, but wasn't Kellen Moore the hot name not that long ago? And then he's not an offensive coordinator in Dallas anymore. And there's always these offenses, they're always circled, right? You had talked about like the Fangio, and now things have changed and there's some holes in this Fangio style. Ben Johnson, his offense, there's a lot of data out there now. You don't think defensive coordinators have been like, man, we need to figure this out because they don't have studs out there. Let's figure out how they play action to us, how they schemed us. There's going to be more answers. That offense has to regress,
right.
has to, in my opinion. So I'm with you there. But the next game is also a turf game at Minnesota,
Hmm.
and it's an advantage. Minnesota's coming off of a Sunday night football game. Chicago's playing at noon at Detroit. This is actually a Monday night football game as well. But despite all of that, and at Minnesota, I have Chicago losing this game. So you're wondering where the losses come. I
Yep.
have Chicago losing 4 out of 5 games here in this middle stretch.
I think that the loss makes sense here. I mean, the main thing with Kirk, I'm going to say this one time because anybody can get hurt playing football. It's a dangerous game. Older quarterbacks like Kirk Cousins, who I think Kirk did, I can't remember if I'm here remembering this correctly, but there were 2 pocket quarterbacks that were shockingly high in quarterback hits taken last year. And if I'm remembering it correctly, feel free to Google this. Fields took the most sacks in 55. And I think Kirk took almost 80 quarterback hits. And if I remember correctly, he's about to be 36 years old. And I don't know how long somebody can sustain that kind of thing.
Well,
So,
did you watch the Netflix quarterbacking series?
oh gosh, what'd they say?
Oh, you didn't watch that? It's pretty good. I mean,
I need
so
to. Carving
yeah,
out the 9 hours is tough.
yeah. Yeah, so Patrick Mahomes is in it, so
Mhm.
he's, the star, and they
Right,
follow him all the way to the Super Bowl. Marcus Mariota, which is interesting because it covers his ups and downs, and then
right.
remember he left
Oh, I've heard it's
Atlanta. He
it's like
left the
raw.
team.
I've heard it's like raw about
Yeah, that's
Mariota.
something. But then Kirk Cousins is the other one. And the one thing that you walk away from with that, besides Kirk's just he's a dad,
Great
like he's
dude.
just whatever dude, is he's a tough dude. Like he had some rib issues. I mean, they had the mic'd up, and you could just tell he was fighting through all of those hits.
Oh
But
yeah.
you're right, because as you get older, as I know, you don't know this yet, Robert, but the older you get, the harder it is. You're going to get injured more just from random stuff and all of these hits. Like it compiles. The older you are, as any football player, father time always wins. You're always going to get hurt. Play's going to fall off. And so, yeah, I don't know when it's going to happen for Kirk. Or, I mean, we had
We
just heard
hope it's
about,
not. We hope it
right,
won't
right.
happen. But there's a
Remember,
reason I didn't talk about this in the week 6 game. It's because we weren't quite there yet. But
okay.
it's 20, they're 25th, like you said, or they've got the 25th other way around. They've got the 25th easiest schedule, which means that they're going to face some tough defenses. And their offensive line did not get a ton better, if memory serves. They've got Justin Jefferson, and their wide receiver 2 is a rookie. I mean, I guess you could say it's TJ Hawkinson. Like, I'm not trying to say that this Minnesota team is, I don't know, headed for disaster or something like that. But the logic lines up to me that stuff's going to go wrong, right? And one
Mhm.
of the easiest sources of stuff could go wrong is a quarterback injury. The pot is calling the kettle black here because Justin Fields has not had a clean injury sheet. Like, the Bears could be seeing more of Tyson Badgett than we would ever want to admit, right? But you tell me, if Chicago and Minnesota lined up with their QB2s starting, who do you think has the edge?
Oh my gosh. And it's Bajent, by the way. You did it again. But yeah, Tyson Bajent for sure is who I would go with. Because I I mean, God, who is the quarterback to Minnesota? It's not Kellen Mond.
Is it
Who is it?
Mannion? Is it still Sean Mannion?
See,
It's not
exactly.
Mond. like you're
Because
mentioning.
there's hype, and there's hype not just because we know who Tyson Bagent is. There's hype nationally about Tyson Bagent. I mean, in my fantasy leagues, there were
No way.
other guys picking up Tyson Bagent. I was like, "Hey, hold up. How do you know about
It's
this guy?"
Nick
Like,
Mullins with Jaron
like
Hall behind him. So Mullins isn't
exactly,
awful. Like
exactly.
that
Eh,
works out for them a little bit, but even so, like we'll have to. I don't know, man. We'll have to see what happens there. But I'll give him the loss. I'll meet you there. But
okay.
that easily could become like I can start to see the case that you're making for the Bears may trip and fall into some wins this season.
Yep.
Like, who's to say what could happen? And they are weirdly resilient. Like, okay, so let's talk about the offense for just a little moment. This is gonna be a long show. Whatever. I've accepted it. I hope you too. I have to, listener. But so the Bears are weirdly resilient on offensive line and or on offensive line and receiver, which is gonna sound weird, but the way that I look at it is the Bears have three receivers that are really, really solid. And then they have an offensive line that you know what? It's not very good in the first place. So the drop off from Dan Feeney to Lucas Patrick, the drop off from I don't know Cody Whitehair to Tyree Carter, the drop off from Braxton Jones to Larry Borum. These aren't positive, but you're not going from A minus down to D plus. Does that make any sense? Like the
Well,
scheme has to
but
carry the weight of this anyways.
they have depth this year, though. That's the other thing. They actually have depth. They didn't have it last year.
Exactly. You'll drop in some cases from C plus down to C minus, but
Yep.
it's going to have to be a schematic offensive line year anyways. And that's not really a good thing. Like I would love for it to be a scheme and really good offensive line like
Yeah.
what the Eagles
Yep.
has, but we've seen too many of these, Nick. I've got it burned into my brain that every 49ers writer, and a lot of them are so smart down in the Bay Area, listed the offensive line as a massive negative heading into the 2022 season because their center, their right guard, and their left guard had played a total of 2 games in the NFL. Did that offensive line look bad to you last year?
I mean, I think it was kind of average. Trent Williams helps out a bunch,
Average
and
is
McGlinchey
great
helps out a
for these
bunch.
kinds of things, isn't
Yep.
it? And so if the Bears got somehow by hook or by crook a below average offensive line, they're weirdly resilient to keeping one. Just because if the scheme's getting them there anyways, it could probably get Jatiri Carter. It
Yep.
could probably get Lucas Patrick. It could probably get I don't want to put Doug Kramer in this conversation. Let's just say we didn't. So let's
Thank
not
you.
say we did. But
Yeah, no.
then the Bears play the bye week. They lost this last year. So hopefully they can beat the bye this year. But then they move on. They take on Detroit at home. How you feeling about that game?
Yeah, so I mean, I know that you were fighting and scratching the last one at Detroit for
That
a
one
win.
feels really good. I got to tell you.
Right, it does. See, it's better than I thought it was. This one I have as a win. Coming off of a bye week, Detroit does not have a bye week. They have extra time to scheme, extra time to prepare, extra time to get healthy, and it's a noon game, and you're at home, which gives you an advantage already. I have that as a win. So I know everyone's all on the Detroit train. We just kind of talked a ton about Detroit, but this one I have Chicago winning.
Anecdotally speaking, I can't remember the last time that Chicago has won off the bye week. I don't think we did it this last year. No, we definitely didn't because we had a late season bye on a 10-game losing streak. And with the Nagy years, it was just a constant that any advantage we had pretty much signaled an automatic loss, including timeouts, including bye weeks,
Oh
including long
gosh.
rest periods. I mean, it was hilarious how bad some of that stuff got, like comic writing hilarious. I'm going to book this one as a loss that surprises everybody. There's going to be a couple of these in there
Oh
this
yeah.
season. The team's
Yep.
just not quite good enough to not lay a few goose eggs, to not have a couple cold games. And
Mhm.
I think that the Bears at this point probably have just enough injuries, and the Lions are pissed about what happened in the game before that while they have a rest advantage, like the Bears stay a little, think about it this way, the Bears stay in more of a season to week to week to week mindset when you've got the Thursday game. I'm starting to wonder if
Mhm.
those mini buys are the perfect bridge of extra rest, but also you stay locked in. With the
Yep.
bye
That's
week,
true.
you treat it like a week off, right? You take time out, you go talk to your family. Then you
Mhm.
have that Monday moment where you get back into game planning. And
Mhm.
some teams come out flat. Not Andy Reid teams, I get it, but some teams do. I kind of need this one. for any win-loss totals to make sense. Not that I've done a great job of keeping track. But a season split with Detroit, the way you've described it, with these two massive rest
Yep.
advantages coming into the game, only makes sense to me. Then they take
Mhm.
on Cleveland. What's your read on Cleveland?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, just right now, just keeping track. The Bears are 7-6
Mhm.
after start 5-2. They're 7-6 right now.
People are talking
And
about the playoffs, right? Like
yeah,
the sports radio conversation is either going to be about how Justin Fields is playing really well, or that Matt Eberflus is the dude because the Bears are above 500 and
right,
pushing,
right.
right?
Yeah, yeah. So Cleveland at this game's at Cleveland, and I think Cleveland, while Deshaun Watson did play well last year, I think Cleveland could be a sneaky one of the best teams in the NFL this year.
Hmm.
I liked what they did in the draft. I love their offensive line. I love Nick Chubb. I think Watson is a very good football player. I'm not going to talk about anything else off the field. I like Amari Cooper. I like David Njoku. That I mean, they have the alien D end. Okay, Miles Garrett, like
Hmm.
freak on freaks, right? They've built up the rest of that defense around him. I like their corners. They have a very good complete team. And it's on the road. So I'm giving Cleveland the win on
I'm
that one.
really glad you went this route because I thought you were about to tell me that the Browns were bad because of Deshaun Watson. And I was
Oh
like,
no.
no, they aren't.
No. No.
Like maybe things go really wrong because Cleveland can't have nice things, but by the same logic, things don't ever go well in Chicago either.
Well,
So I don't subscribe to that. You
they,
didn't
they
even.
could just hand the ball to Nick Chubb the whole game and beat
Yeah,
Chicago.
they'll do
So
fine. Massive offensive line advantage. You didn't
yep.
even mention John Johnson, who I think slaps at safety, let
Mhm.
alone like Joke the linebacker. They've got dudes in Cleveland, and they're probably gonna beat the Bears. I mean,
Oh yeah.
again, maybe bizarre stuff happens. When your quarterback really tanks, I mean, there's only so much you can do about it. But
Right.
we've done a lot of breezing past defensive line disadvantages so far because so many teams are gearing up to pass. For instance, what's Minnesota going to do to bludgeon the Bears on the ground? Like, there are so many of these teams. Like, I would be a little more scared of Detroit, but I didn't realize that they were 18th in rushing success last year, and they didn't do much to fix it other than drafting Jameer Gibbs, which could be enough. But
Yep.
I think their offensive line just gets a smidgen overrated. Not quite great, right? Just
Well,
good.
and we know David Montgomery's not efficient, so that might
No.
just even things out.
I mean, you want to talk about David Montgomery was a great Chicago Bear. David Montgomery at times could look like a Hall of Famer because when he ripped off a 15-yard gain, you'd swear it was 30 because he broke 5 tackles to do it. But statistically speaking, we're talking about one of the least explosive running backs in football. And I'm not surprised because of what Dan Campbell told us at the Combine when he talked about how his favorite way to evaluate football are the guys that just love football. I have no doubt David Montgomery loves football, but I don't know. There's a whole running back conversation to be had there. Jameer Gibbs should be dangerous, but that's a young offense banking on a lot of really players that could go a lot of different ways. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Then
Yeah.
they take on Arizona at home. How much do you want to talk about this game?
So
They're going to
so
win.
so it's a win. A couple other advantages if you need them here, okay? Chicago is playing Cleveland in a to be determined Saturday game the week before. Arizona's playing at 3:05 on Sunday the week before, so there's an advantage there. And also this is December in Chicago against a West Coast team. That's a
Okay.
warm team. It's
A
a win.
dome team too. I I do not subscribe to the bear weather theory. Chicago has done poorly in a lot of these December cold weather games, but Arizona's not going to be any better. Like even if Chicago was a bunch of warm weather boys that were like playing really well, it's just not going to be an easy game for Arizona, who
Mhm.
no, I refuse to believe that they want to win. Like
Right.
it's smart, frankly, for Arizona to go chase one of those high price picks. You thought the Bears got a lot for moving down 8 spots. Just wait until Caleb Williams is on the other end of that. Like the Bears should win. This should be one of those games that's going to just be mutually agreed that the Bears should win this football game.
Yep.
And then they host Atlanta, which is a really interesting game because that is a weird football team in terms of how it matches up with Chicago, don't you think?
Yeah, this is one game I really struggle with the win-loss because Atlanta's a dome team. They actually have a 3 hour advantage here. Chicago plays at 3:25 the week before. Atlanta's noon, but again, it's Chicago has 2 home games in a row. Atlanta has to travel, so is that an advantage? But Atlanta's offensive line, oh my gosh! I mean, if people like Detroit's O line, they're gonna love Atlanta's O line, and now you add in not just Tyler Algier, you add in Bijan Robinson, and you got big physical guys outside that can block. Coming to Chicago in December might not be a big advantage there. It might be almost an advantage for Atlanta because they could run the ball all over Chicago. So with this one, I wanted to make this a win for Chicago. I did. And I don't like Atlanta's defense, but I could just see Atlanta running up and down the field on Chicago and play action passing deep because they have to come up and stop the run. I have Atlanta winning this game.
And you're going to hear, I agree with you. I think Atlanta probably has this. And just to build on this a little bit, there's nobody that's going to grow more than a lot of these first year starter quarterbacks. Maybe some of them play so badly that they get replaced, but I doubt it. And so between this one and bridging to the next game, I would love to beat Green Bay twice. I think you get your best shot at him week one, and by the end of the year, I still don't think Love may be playing at the level of their future quarterback just because of what they stand to gain going in another direction. But I bet a lot of the receivers and tight ends like Musgrave and Reed, etc., have gotten a lot better by this point. And whatever the Bears have left, I think Green Bay's just got too much of a talent advantage. They play in that kind of weather all the time. It's in Lambeau Field. It's hard for me to sell this one as a win. What do you think?
Well, let me try because right now I
Do
have
it.
Chicago at 8-8. Even though some of these games, Atlanta could go the other
I
way.
think
You
they
talk about
pick
the
up a
other
couple
Detroit,
earlier in the schedule, but
right?
go
You
off,
could,
please.
but let me tell you this one, okay? So this is the point in the year. It's the last game of the season. Green Bay's got nothing to play for. My record for them is going to be non-playoff. It's hard to get up the last game of the year when both teams are probably get injured when you're not competing for the playoffs. Now it's just our division rival. That's all they have. Maybe I'm playing so I can get a better contract in the offseason, whatever you want to put it. Okay. On top of that, go back to some of my favorite things here, Robert. Let's see if I can't convince you. Okay. Chicago plays at noon at home
Uh-huh.
against Atlanta the week before. It's a loss. We talked to, right? It could go either way, but we have it as a loss. Green Bay plays on Sunday Night Football the week before. That's
Who do they play? Do you know?
oh man, I'll have to look it up. I don't have it written down, but Sunday Night Football. So that game's not going to get done until what 10 o'clock.
If
That's a big advantage.
I don't want to go all the way here, but from an emotional perspective, if Green Bay lost, like if Green Bay was fighting for the playoffs, let's say that they were 7-9, and then they lost that game and they fell to 7-10, and it was over. I wonder if they'd be able to put the air back in the balloon. Because what's coming to my mind is if Green Bay is decidedly out, right? If they're out by week 15 in some bizarre Schadenfreude moment for Bears fans. They could easily get up in week 18 to be like, not them. We just had this done to us last year. Because the Lions did like what they could to keep them out, they may pay it forward. But also, I don't know, man.
Well, so here's more. Okay, that now it's maybe January, right?
Right.
It's cold both ways, right? Chicago was first in the NFL last year, as you said, in running the ball, 5.4 yards per carry. Green Bay cannot stop the run. They can't tackle and they can't stop the run. But I know you think like those go hand in hand, but sometimes it's an attitude thing, They're not good at that. So you have the extra rest advantage. I think Chicago has the better record at that point. I have Chicago as sweeping Green Bay.
Oh man, that would rule. That would rule so bad. I can't get down enough on the Packers. I can get down on them early, but a lot of guys are going to come back. They're going to play better. And again, these projections get so funny because we don't know who's hurt. I mean,
Mhm.
the Bears could have had DJ Moore done for the season since week 6 at this point, or they don't, and they stay remarkably healthy, as happens to some teams that make bizarre playoff pushes at the end of the year. We don't
Yep.
know. Like, did the Bears deal for somebody at the deadline? Probably not, but maybe.
Yeah.
Especially if the season, if they were, what did you have them? 5-3 at the deadline? Like, you could see Ryan Poles' eyes pop out of his head especially if Chris Jones, true to his word, as ridiculous as it sounds, hasn't played yet for
Yep.
Kansas City at that point. And they go, what are we doing here, man? Like, I mean, I don't know. I have no idea. I think it's so funny because as we go through this exercise, I think the Bears have a path from a rest perspective to maybe not make week 18 matter and maybe have things buttoned
Ooh.
up by then. Like
Ooh.
maybe they'd be playing for the division and not for the wild card, but maybe. And again, I really entered this trying to be realistic, but it is insane how many of these rest advantages that they have. And they're going up against a lot of teams that are historically super spotty. And
Yep.
so if the Bears, let's say that you and I could pretend that football isn't this simple, but let's pretend that passing offense is kind of like a 3-point shot and that running or this is a bad metaphor. Let me just restart. Let's pretend that rushing offense is more consistent than passing offense is. Well, okay. If rushing offense gets you 17 points a week, and that's a ton, gets you 13 points a week, and their passing offense fluctuates between, say, 3 points on top of that and upwards of 20, then the Bears could take some of these games if they just walked into the Chargers stadium and scored like maniacs. Like if Justin Fields does take that next step, they're going to have these games where they blow the other team out of the building, which is not good for Minnesota because I don't think their DB room got good enough. And so then you look at like, I don't know, the Lions, for instance, they're betting a lot on Brian Branch, which would be great if rookie DBs weren't so hit and miss,
Mhm.
especially rookie DBs in the first round for crying out loud. Like include him, but he's a second round pick. So,
Yep.
man, I don't know. I don't know. Like again, we're in the world of could happen, will
Mhm.
happen. I don't know, but that stuff matters. We think about it every week. We just don't normally think about it in September, or in our
Yep.
case, we don't think about it on August 31st. And
Right.
so I can't help looking at this conversation that we're having right now, thinking the Bears' true win loss record may end up worse than their actual win loss record. Who's to say that they will end up deserving it? It may not be me. But if the Bears do win 9 games, oh my gosh, I will plan the parade. Like, that'd be great.
I mean, so I think you had them splitting the division 3-3. I think I have them as 4-2 in the division.
Which would be huge. Like, because the Lions are going to run into their own issues as they go through their season. And I can't help but think that the Packers are the X factor. Like, I was just listening to the Athletic Football Show's beat writer preview, and the Packers beat writer that they had on thinks that the team is headed for a 10-7 year. And it's so funny because as much as you shake your head, Chicago fans are vaguely insinuating the same thing. And I
Well,
think
so
one
I'm
of
shaking
the
my head. I'm
yeah,
shaking my head because I listened to the same show when I went on a
right.
long bike ride. Matt Schneidman was the most optimistic you could be about his team the entire show. And who is it? Kevin Fishbane or
Fishman.
Adam John? Yeah,
Fish went on.
he was like the most pessimistic you could be. Like it was like the most polar difference you could be. He's like, yeah, Fields might not work out. And Snyder's like, oh yeah, I mean, Musgrave could be 1,000-yard guy. Jordan Love's going to be.
Oh,
I'm
I
like,
know.
dude, like it
Oh, I
wasn't.
know.
It just wasn't the same level. So it really taints how people would like listen to that their view of both teams.
I really want Green Bay to get their bell rung, if only because it's actually not a hate thing. It's more that I think a lot of their fans live in this awesome dreamland that the Packers have been able to create where you can roll out a tackle you've never heard of and he's going to be able to block Cleo Mack. I don't know how they do it, but they do
Yep.
it a lot. Like, and so I look at this Packers. I just think it's funny that the Packers and the Bears, one of them gets the dream season that they want, and one of them doesn't. And
Mhm.
I don't want that to be us. I've had enough of that being us. I do get it when you talk about guys like Kevin Fishbane. I think Chicago's fan base is so rabid for a winner that they will invent one in the absence of one. And
Yep.
and I think that would teach beat writers to be tap the brakes guys. Like you start at tap the brakes, and then you tap the brakes the next season, and then you tap
Yeah.
the brakes the next season, and now you're just a negative person. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yep. And what does Green Bay have? Everybody always works out for them.
everybody's just
Every
a homer.
quarterback works out. Like so. Yeah, I get it, but I just shook my head because it was funny listening to it.
Oh,
So
it's wild. It's just to say to me that I don't know. maybe I'm buying into what Schneidman said, and I shouldn't be, but the Packers do have talent on this roster. I don't think they're set up to tank well enough. Like, I don't think they could pivot that hard, if that makes sense, without
I
blatantly throwing games.
I don't want them to have less than 5 wins. I want Jordan Love to be good enough that they hang on to him. That's where I'm at as a Bears fan, because I don't want them to get Caleb Williams or be in the
And
range to
again,
get Drake May.
Green
So
Bay
so
fans are
so
saying
some of the other things to talk about here at the end of our podcast is just like, offense, defense, fields, all that kind of stuff. Um, I have some data. I think that the Bears are going to be a better offensive team this year from a few just basic statistics. One is they ran 70 plays below the average offense last year. Because you talked about the points per drive, right? This kind of goes into that same thing. I mean, they were 20th in the NFL in yards per play.
right.
20th isn't bad.
No, it's not.
And they were just below the league average, but the defense didn't allow them to stay out there to sustain drives to score more points. So I think that changes this year. I think they're going to be above average offense this year. I have them as 13th overall. How
There's
about you?
there's a disgusting amount of this offense that comes down to what the overhauled Bears passing game is actually going to look like. The
Yep.
Bears, Nick, let's just call it what it is. We could talk about vanilla scheme all we want to. Everybody ran vanilla. The Bears vanilla was one of the worst flavors of vanilla that we saw this preseason.
Yep.
Now it's possible that Matt Eberflus, being a hardcore old school style coach, was the hardest core and the most old school about hiding the most stuff.
Yeah.
But what we saw was not good. And the best stuff came out of the West Coast package that they let Tyson Bagent run, and Fields will not run that. Just more than likely. Fields
Right.
doesn't like West Coast style ball, so I wouldn't expect him to. The Bears offense needs to bring it. We need to be having conversations about how we like the Bears scheme, and that can't
Mhm.
just be the running and play action game, which should take a really healthy step forward. It should
Yep.
be successful, but it's hard to do that when you're behind the chains, and eventually the Bears will need a way to dig themselves out of being behind the chains that isn't just and go do something. I'm glad
Mhm.
that works for Arizona, and it did work last year, but this is how we build towards an injury. I would prefer not to. I tend to think that the Bears actually, this is my sane and honest take. 13th makes sense. I think if the Bears get the season they want to, they cracked the top 10. I think if the Bears don't get the season they want to, they finished around 17th, 16th, 17th. Like,
Mhm.
because unfortunately, the Bears' biggest ads were at fill in the blank. What position, Nick?
Wide receiver,
Wide receiver.
offensive line.
And those wide receiver ads, it stands to reason, will only make the biggest impact if the quarterback takes a step forward throwing the ball. And so if we don't see that step forward, we're still going to see a vaguely more productive Justin Fields, but he may not break 3,000 yards. And if he doesn't, I bet you the Bears offense will be right around that league average range, if you ask me. But if he does, I struggle to imagine they don't crack the top 10. If only because
Man,
what? I mean,
you
truly,
know, you're just getting me juiced up. I mean, I'm agreeing with you, but I mean,
it's a
now I'm
high
excited.
leverage season. It's a really high
It
leverage
is.
season. Like, this could go all kinds of directions. And unironically, the future of the Chicago Bears hangs in the balance. Because
Mhm.
if Justin Fields shows us something, great. If he doesn't show us something, oh man.
Well, I mean, and like you're talking about, like, okay, let's picture that deep ball to Velus Jones against Dallas that he drops. I think I could count about the 4 different receivers that would make that catch. Maybe Velus makes it the next time. Like, you keep penciling that in throughout the season, and it's really hard to envision the offense not being above average.
Right. And that's where I think a lot of this is going to come down to the field. Like, the funny part is I have an easier time talking about like total points or total yards than I
Mm.
do where they're going to rank, because that's a guess, right?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
many other good offenses are there going to be in the league? Who's to say? But I don't think the Bears get any higher than ninth. Like, even in the best of best case scenarios, if they blow me out of the water, again, serve me all the crow. I'll eat every scrap. Like, that's crow I am happy to eat.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I really am trying not to be too high on things. It's just amazing how high the Bears were with an offensive line that constantly torpedoed the game plan. Like,
Yeah.
19th in points per drive, despite an offensive line that gave up 6 sacks against a Philadelphia team that the Bears were actively trying to avoid passing the ball on, is astounding.
Right.
Like,
Well,
astounding.
the one thing that, and we'll get to the Fields rushing yards here in a bit, but the one thing that I think is just phenomenal is you talked about cover zero working against Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's a good design runner. Jalen Hurts is a good design runner. Obviously, they're both athletic. Obviously, they both can scramble. Fields is the best scrambler, maybe in NFL history. Not even trying to be just, hot takey, but like he just is. He makes stuff work and happen when things are just messy. He had 949 rushing yards, Robert, in the last 10 games. And he was beat up some of those games, coming off injury in some of those games, almost 1,000 yards in 10 games. And that was him making it work with a bad O-line and just figuring it out. And you add that, like, let's say the passing offense is slightly below average, not, 200 attempts below, but the average is slightly below average. Then you add in this crazy guy that can make anything happen. I mean, he has almost more potential than any quarterback in the NFL. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's there. And so you add that in, if it comes together, and let's say he's not perfect passing the ball and he's just a little Josh Allen-y where it's like great play,
Whoa.
not great
It's
play.
4,500-yard quarterback.
Right.
Like,
We're gonna have a top 10 offense if that comes together. So yeah, I think it's gonna be phenomenal. So let's tie this in, okay? Justin Fields passing yards for this year. What do you have?
so caveat. Most people, I think, are underprojecting Fields' rushing yards because everybody keeps saying, well, I think Fields is going to throw for 3,800 yards. You might. And then they go, well, I can't say he's going to throw or run for 1,000 yards. So then they knock him down. They go, he's going to run for like 650 yards. They give him like a Josh Allen total, right? I think when I watch Justin Fields, yes, I'm pulling a lot off of preseason, but I'm also pulling a lot off of what I thought of his last season because one of the most under-discussed topics I think in Bears fandom is, okay, I'm going to say something a little bit, it might be a little glass shattering, so just prepare yourself, was
Hmm?
how bad the process was on a lot of snaps for Justin Fields. He would stare down a wide open receiver that was running a corner route and he wouldn't throw it because by the time he really clicked to him that he should let the ball go, the window
Yeah.
had passed. It's the NFL. It's tough living out there. But that doesn't mean that some of these throws, in particular, there was a Houston throw and there was an Eagles throw, like early and late in the season, that Fields turned it down. And on both plays, he ran for something spectacular. But the rushing might need to stop. I think Fields, because he was there last year, Nick, takes a step forward. This year, he looks solid as a passer. But
Sure.
like we saw in the preseason game, he's going to lean on his rushing, I think, to the
Yep.
point where that Josh Allen pop, that Jalen Hurts pop that I think a lot of people want to see, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens year 4, which nobody wants to talk about. I don't even want to talk about. I'd rather get my answers now. Wouldn't you? Like, I'd rather see everything congeal right now. I think Fields last year was a year away from being a year away. But this year, I bet you he has another 1,150 yards, might even break the QB rushing record. I think he really leans in. I think everybody's expecting him to lean out. I think he really leans in to that I'm the dude piece of his football game. And as that starts to take over the offense, everything else opens up a little more. And he only throws for 3,200 yards, but not unlike Lamar in his season or in that MVP season, he throws for a ton of touchdowns. I don't have a number for it because
Okay.
I don't want to get myself too excited. But it wouldn't surprise me if a season a little more like A1 Lamar Jackson and a little less like Jalen Hurts is coming, despite how bad a lot of people want that Jalen Hurts Josh Allen season. That's just
Right.
how I see it.
Right. And so I agree with you on your take that I feel like people are doubting his rushing yards just because they want the math to work out,
They do
you
want the
know?
math to work out.
But here's the problem with that. The math works out when you have normal guys happening, you
Yeah,
know? It's like, okay, here's how big Miles Garrett is. What kind of measurables do you think it's gonna have? What? He did that? Like, he's an alien. Justin Fields is an alien,
Justin Fields is
okay?
an
And
alien.
so, like I talked about with the rushing yards, like, he just like, you talked about in the last podcast, how many 50-yard runs he had as a quarterback that just, like, doesn't happen. He does those things, and it's not even something he leaned on in college, it just happened. And I don't know how he can't rush for a lot of yards because it's just like, Okay, there's nobody there.
And he wants to. He did it in a preseason game.
Gone.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, say what you will, but it's like there are going to be these times. It just happened where debatably Darnell Mooney was coming open and Fields decided, I'm going to run for it anyways. Like, it's right now, it's where he's at. I think it's okay for us to say that because I think there are a lot of people that want him to turn into Patrick Mahomes. They want him to, like, blend Justin Fields that we saw in 2022 and also Mac Jones. And I don't know about you, Nick, that just
No.
seems like asking a lot. Like,
Yeah.
that's
No, it's not gonna so here's a debate for you though. So you had brought up Jalen Hurts, okay?
right.
So here's just a little quiz for you, live. How many passing yards did Jalen Hurts have last year? Now again, it was in 15 games.
3,700 yards.
Yep, 3701.
I have studied
So,
this a lot. This one I know.
okay, yeah, so that was in 22 passing touchdowns, and he ran a lot of those 1 yard whatevers, but like it's not a massive amount, because
It's not.
you add in 2 more games, he's probably at what, 4,100, and it's not something that's, like, not possible. So I also have Fields rushing for 1,100 yards because I don't this sounds bad. I don't know how he can't get 1,100 yards if he's healthy. I don't know. When you rush for almost 1,000 yards in 10 games, how do you not have 1,117? Like,
Exactly.
it's baffling. So that's what I have in terms of rushing. Passing wise, I have him at 3,308.
I think that makes a ton of sense. I can't believe you went down to a 4-digit number. Like, that's
Yeah.
specificity.
Now, eh, now that I had that as is in 16 games. Let's say he misses a game, right?
Yeah.
Or as you said, maybe they don't play the starters of the last game. 3,308. So if he plays all the games, it would be 3,515 is what I have broken down.
Right. I think that's extremely reasonable. I think we've basically predicted the same thing, to be honest. Like,
Yeah, no, I
people
agree.
will people will split hairs, but I struggle to look at Justin Fields with as much change as is happening. I mean, Nick, we didn't talk about this on the last show, but like his throwing motion is clearly different. Like,
Yep.
he's tuning up a lot of different things that are going on in his game. And you know that the feedback loop that Justin Fields has endured so far has been brutal. Throw with anticipation, Jair Alexander picks it off. Run the
Yep.
ball on a play that you should never run on, score a touchdown anyways. Like, it's been as backwards for a player as it
Yep.
could possibly get. And
Yep.
I struggle to envision that to get to quarterback purity, we don't need a season in the middle where stuff goes right, stuff goes wrong. But so far, DJ Moore got 2 touches and he took one to the house and he alien moded his way out of contact the second time and picked
Yep.
up another 30 yards. The guy's going to make an impact, if you ask me. Even
Right.
if it's just on play action stuff, like that's fine. I mean, in the wide world, I don't know. I don't know. The truth is, Nick, to me, that if Fields looks like what you and I expect him to, there should be a verifiable step forward in what he does. Also, I want to point out, I don't think Justin Fields will look pretty doing a lot of this, to be honest with
Nope.
you. Like, I think he's going to hold on to the football, quote unquote, too long for a lot of
Yep.
people's taste. I think he's going to get a lot of his passing yardage in chunks where people are going to end games saying, yeah, but if you take out the blank to blank, he ended up at only about 130 yards, like
Uh-huh.
on the day. Or they're going to say, this isn't sustainable. And that's not really the point. Because to be honest with you, I don't care what Fields looks like in 2030 today. I care about what he looks like in 2025, longest window possible. Like, if you wanted to talk to me, Nick, about the future, that's as far as I'll go. Like,
Yeah.
the Bears want to compete in 2024. They want to win in 2025. And if Fields burns hot and the fuse burns short, if we're looking at a Cam Newton style career, so be it, Nick. I will figure it out at the end of the road, right?
Yep.
I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater in any circumstance. And if you end up with a good quarterback that plays the game differently, no, I still don't want to play Tyson Bagent just because he plays the game in a way that stylistically, look, we got to talk about something I think is brutal but true. Tyson Bagent came in while the Bills still had most of their first team out on the field, and the offense got shuttered because that style of play, distributor ball, is good, but it doesn't stir the drink when
No.
your offense is just a little under talented. And the Bears' offensive line, in my personal opinion, isn't good enough to not have a quarterback that the defense is scared of. And Fields, maybe not as a thrower, but absolutely as a runner, on week 1 is going to put the fear of God in some defenses. That changes the calculus. You attack the offensive line differently. Who needs every advantage they could
Mhm.
possibly get,
What
Nick?
and the biggest advantage is when you get in the red zone near the goal line when or anywhere when you go empty, like, it changes everything. You had talked about, like, that distributor ball. That quarterback is becoming a dinosaur. The Jared Goffs are becoming a dinosaur, and that's why I'm it's tough to see it sustained top 10 offenses for year to year to year because those guys are gone. They're looking for Bryce Youngs when they can buy time in the pocket, etcetera. It's just changing. Have you Here's a question. So moving to receivers, I'm just curious. Did you break down receiver yardage at all?
I have thought about it. I
Okay.
didn't get to I didn't pick out my numbers, but to use an example, I came into training camp assuming Moore would get like 1100. I would take 1,000. Like, I don't think the Bears are going to
Mhm.
throw it that many times, but I want a four-digit number out of Moore if I got to choose. I think Darnell Mooney catches 750 to 800 because that made sense to me, and I had Claypool around 600. But if Claypool takes that step up and gets back to those rookie heights, like, this is going to rule. It's just a matter of how, who, and when,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Yeah, so I have it broken down. This is just, obviously it's estimates, everybody. I have more at what 1,050, that range. And I have Mooney and Claypool both at 700 because I think that we're gonna have big plays both ways. One might be better red zone, one might be better in the open field. I mean, who knows? But I think they both have solid contributing years. But if you have three guys like that, it hurts everybody else.
Oh, it
I
hurts
have Cole,
everybody else.
I've I've Cole Kmet at 400. I have all of the running backs combined with dump offs and screens, which has been better this year at 300. I have Tunyon only at 150. Then I have Scott Equinemius St. Brown for combining for about 200 or just over.
And this is where, honest to goodness, I sit here and I think that we're over projecting the current receivers. Like, I think it actually makes sense. Okay, I'm gonna say something, Nick, that might make your skin crawl, but just strap in, right? I could easily see DJ Moore being like an 850-yard receiver, which would break all of our hearts. But it'd be great per attempt. It would just the volume would come down because when you listed those running back numbers, I could see him at 550 yards very easily. I
Potentially.
think Fields is going to check the ball down more than ever. And that quick throw to Khalil Herbert that went straight through his hands, to me, that proved Fields sensed pressure and he got the ball out in a friend of mine
Mhm.
who coaches, like, his opinion, too fast. Man, I love that. Say what you will. I want
Mhm.
Fields to ditch the ball too quickly. I don't want him to go full check down Charlie. I don't know if he can, but like, if we speed up that clock, running backs in particular are going to pick up a lot of yardage because that's an easy dump off, especially with screens. And so I'm with you. I don't know how the pot's going to end up cooked. Wouldn't surprise me if one of Moore or Mooney stuns us with like a 500-yard year, 400-yard year, something low, something gross, right?
Yeah, good.
Especially if they get vaguely ignored. The plan that I had in mind, Nick, was Fields has this connection built with Mooney and Moore's his dude. And he just kind of
Yep.
forgets about Claypool. But if they built up rapport in camp, which it sounds like they did, then
Mhm.
that may not happen. But,
Right.
we'll see.
Yeah, and I mean, I just glanced quickly last year. Last year, running backs were at like 400-ish, and that's kind of why I took running backs down and tight ends down because Komet, he just got extended and it's less.
Mm-hmm.
Is they only had 400 yards with all the running backs, and Komet I think had like 550. That was with Mooney playing what 12 games. Claypool had
11.
67 pass snaps. Is it everybody? He had
Mm-hmm.
that MCL. Don't forget about that. And that's all they could get. So
Yep.
now even if it's the bigger pie, you add more and a healthy Claypool and maybe a healthy Mooney, hopefully all year long, those numbers aren't going to be very high. Um, Defense, okay? We don't have to spend a ton of time on this. This is a pretty long podcast, but defensively, we've talked about the concerns with the rush defense. We've talked about the concerns about getting after the quarterback and how they prefer these DNs that maybe are better against the run than not as much as good against, pass rush. That's what we want. We like the linebackers. We like all the potential on the back end. The back seven, I think, is the heart of this defense. They were 32nd in NFL last year.
Yep.
They were terrible. We talked through all the numbers earlier. I have them jumping up this year,
2.
20th.
That would be a massive jump. I think if
Mhm.
the Bears win, I think if the Bears defense is 20th by hook or by crook, they win 9 games. I
Yep.
honestly do, Nick. To
Yep.
me, okay, so you ever heard of the Enneagram?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, so you know how the whole concept of the Enneagram is that there are like 9 core personality types, but more
Yep.
importantly, you are a number, let's say you're a 3, and when you are unhealthy, you switch to a different one and you become like a 6. I know a
Mhm.
lot about the Enneagram, so just
Yeah,
follow me
yeah,
on
yeah,
this.
you know more than I do. I remember this when I back when I was dating and, like, it
Right.
was, like, in the dating profiles, and I'm like, "I haven't done this, but I know what it
That
is."
is literally all I need you to think about is this idea of you are one thing, and then when you are unhealthy, you switch to something else. The
Okay.
Bears defense, when you can't stop the run, doesn't play its defense. It plays this, I'm trying not to use the hot button word that I'm thinking of. It plays this very far inferior version of their defense, where there's just not near as much disguise that you can run because there is no question about whether the Bears are playing single high or not. They're playing single high. They need 8 in the box. And
Mhm.
not to mention, their linebackers start flowing to the run action too quickly because they don't trust their defensive line. And you get gashed by play action attacks, just like we saw the Packers just gash the Bears again and again in that week 2 game. Now, a lot more of the players, I'm talking to you, Kyler Gordon. I'm talking to you, corners. I'm talking to, I guess, everybody but the linebackers, right? Are experienced enough in this defense that I don't think that they'll have that problem. Tremaine Edmonds, for instance, has very well trained play action instincts, like run or like flow slow to the run, but still in the direction of your gap, then get back into coverage. And that should help the Bears a lot. But man, they will go as far as the defensive line takes them. Like, I am hoping, I think 20th is a great spot. I'm expecting like 27th. Like, Nick, I'm worried. Not
Yeah, no, I get it, but so, I mean, here's the other part, okay? NFL last year, teams ran the ball at the best rate in terms of rushing yards per carry in NFL history. But what do we hear about? Do we hear
I
about,
knew you were going to
"Man,
say this.
the Chargers need to run the ball more. Oh, man, the Packers need to run the ball more." No one
If
talks about running, they talk about passing. It's fun. Let's throw it all over the place. So, in my opinion, the Bears built their defense to stop the pass without the pass rush, right?
look
And kind of like close out the rushing lanes for quarterbacks to scramble from and just kind of slowly squeeze out. And they have these versatile guys on the inside with Gordon and the linebackers. So I think the popularity of the pass is going to help them a little bit here. And yeah, they could be 27th. And I talked about earlier. Go ahead.
I can think of 2 teams, two that leaned on the run game against the Bears. It was the Packers, who, especially in that first game, just bludgeoned the Bears with the run game. And then later in the season, I can remember that the Bills were like, we are in a tight game with the Bears. What are we doing? And pulled their heads out of their rear end and started running the ball like crazy in the second half and put distance
Yep.
between
Yeah.
themselves and Chicago.
Yeah, the
Like
Bears are winning that game.
that
I couldn't believe the Bears were beating the Bills at one point. I'm
it
like,
it was
"Don't mess up
insane.
your pick this much."
It was meltdown level. Like
Yeah,
it was bad. I mean, say what you will about the Matt Eberflus defense. I don't schematically like it, but which is more likely that they hosted 2 off games by Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen, or that there's something to this? I still
right.
think it's the prior. I think a lot of teams started to take a week off against this team that was
You
losing a
could, you
billion
could,
games. But
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 it's
like
possible.
a lot of teams, Green Bay was another one. They were rolling coming into that Bears game. And then the offense couldn't do anything. They needed everything going their way to get back into that one. I don't know, man. Like, because then you look at Dak, you look at Tua, they shredded the Bears. Like, they had no trouble
Mhm,
with the Bears throwing the holes. But, anyways, all this to say that there weren't that many teams that just sat down and ran the snot out of the football. And a lot
yep,
of the teams that did kill the Bears killed them over the middle. And TJ Edwards has looked better than advertised. And I advertised him pretty highly. And Tremaine Edmonds, he doesn't look as big in a Bears uniform as he did in a Bills uniform. Not yet, at least. But we're getting there. Because, like,
it's slimming, it's the dark,
I
slimming.
want to see that guy, Nick, that you watched on the All 22 and you swore he was 10 feet long.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
it's crazy what Edmonds did in a Bills uniform, and he can do it in Chicago. We just need to
Mhm.
see it. I don't think he Anyways, that's a whole separate conversation. But so I look at this Bears defense and I see how they could succeed. I just need to let those offenses across from them make mistakes and let them end up 20th for all the reasons that you're talking about. Because if this was Madden, somebody would just run the piss out of the ball and they would
Yep.
beat me. But it isn't Madden.
But they
These
don't.
teams
In
love their
Madden, they pass
quarterbacks.
too.
These teams love their quarterbacks. These
They
teams
do.
love throwing the football. Carolina is actually a modest worry, but they don't have like who's their current running back? Miles Sanders. Like
Yep.
the Eagles didn't trust him to beat the tar
Nope.
out of the Bears. Like it gets so weird.
It does.
Maybe this is how
here's
the
some things
Raiders
that
beat us. Maybe
some
Josh Jacobs and the Raiders come to
right,
town and just grind the Bears into dust. But
right.
even
Well,
that's
I
a
mean,
maybe.
Washington doesn't run the ball well. They don't have great running backs. So
They did
one of the
last year. They did like what was it? What's
mm,
his name? Scott. It's not Scott Foster, is it? The OC. You know who I'm
oh,
talking
yeah,
about?
yeah, yeah. Yep, it is.
Like he was doing he was doing amazing things in that run game, but they didn't lean on it.
No,
Like it's
no. Well, and you knew Chicago was bad at stopping the run because you looked at the stats from the whole year and the team still didn't do it. This might be something else that might help you out, okay? Despite being terrible, Chicago was tied for the fourth least defensive penalties in the NFL last year, and they were only 13th worst in starting field position, which I thought was actually a lot worse than that, which is actually kind of phenomenal.
the
So,
Bears gained yards last year.
right,
Like their offense was actually pretty healthy as
right.
considering that they were labeled one of the worst offenses in the NFL. They were constantly moving the rock. Like other bad teams, not unlike Washington, went 3 and out all the time. Not Chicago. And so I do think one thing that okay, so building on this, right? The Bears defense right now seems pretty set up to do exactly what they did against Buffalo, right? Get to third down. Even if it's not third and very long, get to third down and bet on math that they can't convert them all.
Yep.
And it's funny because against teams like Buffalo, I'm looking at you, Kansas City, I think they'll get shredded, right? But they play Baker Mayfield. Like
Yeah.
they play a
Jared Goff.
super hit and miss and like
Yep.
couple teams across their roster. Like, how
Yep.
many third downs is Love going to convert? Like,
Mhm.
probably some, but
Some, yeah. But I mean, to have a young quarterback consistently make all good decisions, like it's tough for me to see. And then plus, I mean, I know you talked about this earlier, but I'm going to reiterate this. So Matt Eberflus led defenses, their end of season rank ninth, 10th, 18th, and 10th. And Chicago has 6 new starters on this defense from the
yes,
opening day last year to opening day this year. It's a almost brand new. I mean, you have the DBs now add Stevenson instead of Vildor, and that unit's about the same. But linebackers on up, the only guy left is Justin Jones. I
and
mean, I know Sanborn, but that was late in the year.
I
So it's a
am
brand new defense.
I am begging, I am begging teams to throw at number 4 more often. You won't find a more stalwart Eddie Jackson fan than me on the
Mhm.
internet, more than likely. I think I might like Eddie Jackson more than his parents do. Like as a football player, I think he is so much fun watching him take up space, like kill coverage or kill passing attacks, and all the different things that he does at safety. That could be
Well,
a whole conversation if you disagree. The point,
Didn't have him at the end of the year either, Robert.
no, no, we didn't.
Jets got hurt. Didn't have him at the end of the year. Maybe that Green Bay game goes differently. Maybe they beat Detroit
I mean,
later.
it's possible. And I look at a lot of this stuff and I think to myself, it really is like the moment that teams gimp themselves. Cause I remember this. I was there 20, not literally, but like I watched the 2020 game when Nick Foles like bowed up against the Tom Brady Buccaneers that would go on to win the Super Bowl. And Ronald Jones, I think it was, carried the pill for 6.8 yards per carry. And the Bucks lost because Bruce
Yep.
Arians wouldn't run it. Like
Yep.
they had every advantage on the ground. And
Mhm.
everybody points back to Tom Brady forgetting the 4th down. The coach forgot which part of his offense was working. And
Yep.
if the Bears run into a bunch of that, I don't trust Green Bay to do that. I think Green Bay is one of you might argue, Nick, Green Bay is the nightmare matchup for them. Green Bay and the Raiders, because these are teams that like their running game. But teams
Yeah.
like Minnesota that don't love their running game might be quick to get away from it, and they're gonna struggle. if that
If
makes sense.
I would be more afraid if Green Bay, their offensive line and their rookie tight ends were good run blockers, but they're not.
Right.
I don't know. The Green Bay's whole running game could be different because they don't have what's his name? This Aaron Rodgers guy at quarterback, and defense is having to respect. Remember the most annoying thing with Rodgers? He'd be in this run, and then he would just look and be like, "Oh, that corner's off," and he would hike it quick and then throw it to the
Yep.
receiver like a screen that wasn't even meant to be a smoke screen,
Yes.
but he would make it one.
It's
He
infuriating.
added all of those elements that had struck fear, not in just the Bears defense, the entire NFL. Gone. You think that teams are not going to respect the run the same? They're not going to respect all of the other things the same. The play fakes, the audibles, all of that's different. I know now it's going to be the true Matt LaFleur offense, but you know what? The Matt LaFleur offense didn't look so good in Tennessee before he got to Green Bay. We
I
need to see what happens here. I'm just not sure that Luke Musgrave is going to be the same as Mercedes Lewis.
It'll take time. I mean, not as a blocker, not at all as a
No,
blocker. Like
no.
everybody's loving on Musgrave. Historically speaking, tight ends really struggle as rookies, especially second
Yep.
round tight ends. Like we're going big data. We haven't gotten a lot of guys like him, but so it could easily be different. But I don't know, man. Like I think I'm going to be high on Green Bay until the moment they lose to us. And then at that point, I will just get really talkative. Just like a lot of other Bears fans. But because part of me doesn't want to wish the devil on myself, to be honest with you. I see talent on this Packers team, and the moment it works out like all the data says it should, good, because it hasn't in the past. I've been there when the Packers were starting two backup tackles and we somehow still didn't pressure Aaron Rodgers. You know what I'm saying? Like
That's Aaron Rodgers.
the good thing, the best part to me about this Bears season that I look at right before we get to our last two categories
Yep.
is that the Bears on accident. Okay, so one more metaphor. Chick-fil-A is my wife has celiac disease. That means she can't eat gluten down to the molecular level. We can't even have cross contamination, right? And on accident, Chick-fil-A doesn't have any cross contamination because they fry their fries in peanut oil to make them taste like they do. And that means that they accidentally have separate fryers for their chicken and their fries. So it just works out, right? In the same way, I don't think the Bears intended to invent a fashion forward offense, but this wide hitting, aggressive quarterback plus running back run game that they have is the answer to too high. There's no way it isn't. Like
Yes.
it is as too high is revolutionizing the NFL. Every time teams like Atlanta, every time teams like Miami switched to too high, they got bludgeoned on the ground because the moment they did, the Bears would call something for Justin Fields to run the football, or they'd call something where Justin drew a defender or two, and suddenly the Bears were hat on hat or +1 in the running game by default. Like
Mhm.
the Bears have an offense that I wouldn't exactly call modern because there are a lot of offenses that we would look at and we would call them more modern than the Bears. But because of Justin Fields' rush threat, it's showing up as the perfect time. I mean, it
Yep.
really is because quarterback running, I'm convinced, is going to run a lot of these new too high defenses over because those defenses are built to get Mahomes to pull the ball down. They're built to keep Kirk Cousins in check. They're built to stop Joe Burrow. They're
Yep.
not built to stop Michael Vick. Like, I'm
No.
and that's not a great thing because Michael Vick never cracked 3,000 yards. But I think if Fields was Vick for a season, to use an example, he may win MVP. I mean, he really might because I think a lot of those throwing lanes will be that much more open. It
Mhm.
doesn't take a perfect ball to hit DJ Moore when you've got 5 yards of separation. But
No. And
maybe I'm just too excited.
and add in, Robert, that like let's say the play design wasn't so great. Let's say the execution wasn't so great. Then you have arguably the most athletic quarterback in the NFL. And
Hmm.
he's like, cool, I'm just gonna make this happen. Like, I don't know, Fields' rookie year on fourth down
I
against
knew
the
you were bringing it up.
49ers when it was a terrible play and he slips and he's like, okay, cool. I'm just gonna reverse field. And then Jason Peters, can you just knock out Fred Warner here? I'm just gonna score a touchdown. Like he just can make that happen. Like it's the trump card on top of everything when you have a complete freak at the most important position in all of
And
sports.
everybody keeps talking about how poor Fields looked in week 3 of the preseason. I'm one of them. I was too nice. Like, and that's okay. Because I was pointing out how I thought some of his process got a little bit better. I'll tell you what, you know that slant you can run in Madden where you hit the like very late window and turn the slant into a post that everybody does in the video game, but they don't do in real life. You know the one I'm talking about? Where like
Yeah.
the slant happens and you just sit on it for an absurdly long time.
Yep.
Fields will be able to do that. Like on these play action attacks where it's like an RPO style play action fake, and then Fields doesn't throw it for way too long, DJ Moore's just gonna keep running. And like he's gonna be really open on some of them
Mhm.
where the timing looks way off. You're not hitting him on the body on the break. But we saw DJ Moore pull in some outrageous catches. Everybody talked about how DJ Moore pulled that ball basically off the turf, had to go down to a knee to go get it in preseason week 3. I must have missed the 30 yards of yak that he picked up afterwards anyways, as if somehow that slowed him down. Like Nick, I see too many pieces within this offense for if Fields stays the same. There should be fireworks, let alone
Yep.
if he takes a step forward. What the Bears can't have is Fields' process do that whole like it gets worse before it gets better thing, because if it gets worse, he may not be given the time to get better. So we need to see either better or
Yep.
what we had. And if he does that, man, I don't know. Like, I could be the doomiest doomer about the preseason. They're going to use a lot of play action. They're going to run crack toss. They're going to run a G lead. They're going to run a bunch of stuff that's going to spring leaks in a Green Bay defense, among others. And they're going to, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Oh, no, 100%. I mean, it's one of those things where not we talked about this 98 quarterback rating for 9 weeks last year with bad receivers, with bad O-line. Now you add in just these little things, even if he maintains that, he could have a season that's better than what Lamar Jackson had. That's better than I mean, he could be at the level of Jalen Hurts. That's why like this leap isn't like, well, you know what? If we just have his best season at Ohio State and then his best rushing season, we're just going to mix all this stuff together. Like you have DJ Moore, he's there. I mean, PFF ranked Chicago's wide receivers or receiving units 32nd last year, which I get it. They ranked them 13th this year.
it's a huge
That's
step.
that's a huge jump. Like it's not like we're making this stuff up. So it can be something completely different on offense with personnel. And if Fields just plays mediocre, it takes off like another stratosphere. Okay, two last things because it's a super long podcast. Who's leading the Bears in sacks in 2023?
Chris, no, I can't do it. But so if I'm being legit, I think that DeMarcus Walker creates the most pressure and Yannick Ngakoue picks up the most sacks. So that's with Walker kicking inside a bunch, and he'll flush the quarterback out to the backside of the pocket where Yannick will be he was supposed to be getting pushed around the back of the pocket, but suddenly the quarterback shows up right in his face, right? Like Yannick has picked up a bunch of cheap sacks his entire career, but he's going to keep going for him and he's going to get a few of them. And so that's who I have. I think Justin Jones sits in the running for me, if only because the Bears love to feature that 3 tech position. But in the real world, I don't think Justin's going to play it. I think that's going to be DeMarcus Walker. I think that's what they signed him to do,
Right,
to be
right.
honest. And so,
Well,
yeah,
or they go double 3 tech on pass rush downs.
double 3 tech on pass rush downs. And I mean, I think they're going to bring Dom Rob onto the field for the rush downs because obviously they didn't think Terrell Lewis or Travis Gibson was going to do it. And Dom Rob's long arm is a thing. Plus, I don't think it's going to be Raheem Green. I just don't. And
Right,
so
right.
I feel safe with Yannick. It's the easy pick for a reason. What about you?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yannick,
as much as I wanted to pick, something else as a
something
flashy
creative.
pick, as long as it's not Jaquan Brisker this year, I think it's a positive for the Bears
Right.
defense. But yeah, I'm gonna pick Yannick Ngakoue as well. I mean, it's what he does, even though his pressure rate has decreased as his careers went on. This is what you're there for. When it's third and long, he's on the field because he knows this is what you pay me money to do. So he's gonna deliver that. I don't know that he's going to reach the threshold of 8 like he always does. Let's hope so.
Hope so.
But I don't know.
Ask me the next question.
So I already know the answer to your next question. Okay. I have a different answer. But, anyways, the next question is who leads the Chicago Bears in interceptions in 2023, Robert?
Jalen Johnson. Call it a vibe, man. I know I'm shocking you. I thought it would be Eddie Jackson too, but I suddenly changed my mind. Where I think Jalen Johnson with a corner 2 and a Kyler Gordon and a Tremaine Edmonds that don't suck right? Like you've got a corner two that isn't Kendall Vildor. You've got an inside corner that isn't going to give up a ton of space. You won't get that slant to Stephon Diggs on 3rd and 2 every time you try it. I've watched that one back. Gordon was too close. Like the diving play that he had, like it's not going to be easy. And while I think this does favor Eddie Jackson, I still think he's got too much of a reputation. Like Eddie Jackson picked off the ball too many times last year. And we saw this in 2019. If you
Yeah.
remember way back then, after 18, people would take a sack over throwing at Eddie Jackson. If they
Yeah.
saw what became number 4 later at the time, what was it? I can't remember his number all of a sudden. Like,
39.
was it 30? Yeah, it was 39. If they saw 39 in an area code, they just looked somewhere else. Like
Yep.
Kirk Cousins was terrified of the man. I don't blame him. That
Oh,
that
that pick
highlight was
six he had on
that,
him. Woo,
that highlight
baby.
was everywhere. So I
Yep.
actually think the ball ends up going back towards the number 1 receiver, who Jalen Johnson will be on. And it wouldn't surprise me because I like Jalen Johnson if he fights through and picks off a couple passes. He doesn't need a million. Like, I still don't see this defense being pressure heavy enough to take away the ball at a above average rate, especially because they aren't so far from what we've seen. They aren't a defense that does things to influence that. To use an
Right.
example,
Yeah.
Brian Flores' defense should take the ball away. They might lead the league in explosives against, but they should take the ball away. The
Yep.
Bears are going to try to limit those explosive against, but it wouldn't surprise me if Jalen Johnson picks off 4 passes, right? Something
So
that's
here,
not that many, but
so here's what.
it'll lead the team.
Right. So here's what's funny. You picked Jalen Johnson because they're going to throw away from Eddie Jackson, right?
Right.
I Jalen Johnson just hasn't picked off many passes in
No,
his
he
career,
hasn't.
so I can't go with
Outside of the
him.
game where he picked off 2 because he finally got some attention.
Right. Yeah. But if I'm looking at the Bears secondary,
Right.
Jalen Johnson's the best cover guy, man to man. Eddie Jackson's the best overall cover guy.
Did you pick who I think you did?
Kyler Gordon, better, sticky in the
Definitely.
slot. Tough for
Mhm.
that guy to lead the team in interceptions.
Right.
So what's it been for like years? It's been like, who am I going to throw to? Oh, Kendall Vildor. Let's keep loading this guy up and throwing
Picked
tons of
Tyreek
targets this way.
Stevenson, didn't
I'm
you?
picking Stevenson
Man,
to
that would
lead
be
the team in
unreal.
interceptions because he's going to get so many. He's going to get so many opportunities that way, and I feel like he's a guy that doesn't. He still has. He's going to let up big plays. He has a lot of confidence, but he already had 1 interception. He should have had 2 in preseason because he's got these long arms. I think that he's going to surprise because of all of the targets his way and lead the team in interceptions.
That pick he had was, by the way, phenomenal, in my
Yep.
opinion. The first one was a bad throw. The second one, I loved the fact that Stevenson's playing trail. I know you know this, but just for the viewers that are listening, Stevenson's playing trail, and he's beat on a deep route downfield. But the reason you'll play trail coverage or recover the way he did, because he may have been playing a different technique but got beat and switched to trail, is because if the trail route breaks, you're underneath it by default. There's a reason Stevenson is literally, if you go back, he is watching where the receiver is because the sideline only has so much space.
Yep.
How do you think he caught the ball? It's because he turned around knowing the ball had to be at blank place and just accepted it into his body. Like,
Mhm.
this is a guy that knows how to take the ball away. And
Yep.
he's got the sidelines to work with. Kyler Gordon didn't. I thought Kyler Gordon was basically about as hung out to dry as any corner could be in the NFL last year.
Yes.
Because not only did he get no linebacker help with the way that the coverage scheme worked out, but slot guys could run for 3.5 seconds wherever they wanted to, and Kyler had to stop him. With Tyreek Stevenson, he gets beat on that play that he picked off if the sideline doesn't exist. I have
Mhm.
bad news for offenses. It does. And so Stevenson may end up kind of having, like, I could understand if he did, Nick, I would imagine he's going to have a Trayvon Diggs style year, like an earlier Trayvon Diggs style year where he gives up, oh gosh, so many yards, like a disgusting amount of
Yep.
yards, but he picks off like 6 passes or something
Mhm.
like that. I could see that. I really
Yep.
could.
Yep. Yeah, so I mean that's why it might be a little surprising that Eddie Jackson's the guy that I thought 95% sure you were going to pick him and you didn't.
Well,
But
I would, but teams will play scared of Ejax. Like, it doesn't take much because, okay, so there was an interview with somebody about a year and a half ago. So relatively recent, while people were forgetting that Eddie Jackson existed. And they asked
Yeah.
him, okay, who do you think is best cover 4 safety in the NFL? The guy responded, Eddie Jackson. Like the players know is the
Yeah.
way I would put it. And yes, he's 30. Maybe he falls off, but he's an instincts-based player. It's never been about athleticism for him. And now he knows the game better than ever.
I'm just concerned, and I thought he could have been a cap casualty. I just hope that foot's healthy. That's the one thing
I hope it's
I'm
healthy too.
concerned about.
I hope it's healthy too. I mean,
Yeah,
the day Eddie Jackson gets cut or isn't signed anymore will be a sad day in the Schmitz house, but
yeah.
that's how it goes. I mean, I I think Jaquan Brisker's gonna get thrown out a decent amount, but I want to believe that he'll get in front of the ball. Uh, I do think the Bears' back seven is pretty solid. Like,
Mhm.
we'll need to get to the point where they're not getting ripped up by Buffalo's short passing game, but at the same time, football games are freaking long for a reason. Like, we can laugh as much as we want to, Nick, but like, okay, you scored on the opening drive. That's not a weird occurrence. Like,
No,
a lot of times teams don't have the same sense of timing when they trot out the second drive or the third drive or the fourth drive. And if I'm going to give Eberflus and Alan Williams some serious credit, they tailor the hell out of their scheme. Like, they are the kinds of guys who will go, okay, so you know how your landmark was the hash? Don't stand on the hash. You're going to stand two steps to the
yeah.
right because that's where they're curling on you. You sit there, you may pick up a pass. And
Well, and then you add in that you have all of this experience from 2 guys that called the defenses in the middle of your defense now with Edwards and Edmonds, and it's gonna show up like just shorten passing lanes, and you just think that those instincts are gonna lead to tip passes, interceptions like it has last year for that team. I mean, I think they combined with either picking off or deflecting and causing, I think like what 4 or 5 interceptions just those 2 linebackers last year.
oh, yeah, I mean, that's what they do. But we have officially hit, Nick, the a quick back of the napkin math, the 135-minute mark on this prediction show. Hey, it's about as in depth of a bear prediction show as you're gonna find, which I'll take because it's long as snot. But if you enjoy the show, please do let us know. Like, you can watch this one over a matter of days. It sounds like you may need to. But Nick, do you have anything as you are spinning up and getting ready for this season?
Um, I think that this season is gonna be an exciting season for Chicago. And as we've talked about, it could be great, it could be inconsistent, but no matter what, at least there's pieces in place to have Bear fans, myself, yourself, excited for this season. It's probably not gonna be great in terms of, you know, going to the championship game, but it's not gonna be bad like last year. There's gonna be great games, there's gonna be down games. Just ride with us, okay? We're gonna be bringing you a ton of content because we're
We
gonna
are.
be excited just like you. So tune in, follow us on Twitter, the Bears blog. There's lots of content we'll put out there, but it'll be a fun season. I'm glad we're doing this, Robert. I'm pumped.
Nick, I have too much emotionally invested on the line. I got into talking about the Bears and becoming a part of independent media about right after the 2018 season. And all I have covered, this doesn't even include 2019, all I have covered are teams where the fans are checked out by week 11. And all I want is a team where that's not the case. Like,
Yeah,
not just for my own whatever. Like, I want to follow a Bears team that's relevant. I don't. Dan Wiederer last year acted like meaningful December football is hard. Teams with 5 wins going into December are playing meaningful December football. This is a low bar, Nick.
yep,
And I
yep.
just, for the Bears to lose 6 games, which is possible, a lot would have to go wrong. The offensive
Win,
line would have.
win.
What? Oh,
You said
sorry. Yeah. For the Bears to win 6 games, a lot would have to go wrong. Justin
yeah,
Fields would need to like take a step back. Basically, the passing game would need to overshadow the rushing game. Like, they'd need to basically get lost in the sauce of their receivers and try to throw the ball too often, despite maybe Fields not looking comfortable. Think preseason week 3, but worse.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and the defense would have to be every bit as bad as advertised, with the defensive line polluting like the whole product. The problem is, as doomer a mindset as that is, Nick, it doesn't get borne out by like
Mm,
historical precedent and numbers. Like, I
right.
promise I'm scared. Right? Like, the Packers just had a clean preseason. Say what we will about how unrealistic it seems. It was nice. You know what I mean? And the Bears, on the other hand, had a kind of rocky preseason, which was self-inflicted because first game looked great, but then they didn't play Fields in the second game, and the third game, it felt like they were intentionally working their we're down 14 offense. Hey, that's fine, and you don't have to announce it, right? And it was rusty. Who cares? The passing downs don't matter. You know what I'm saying? But like, my whole final thought on this prediction is I want to be low on the Bears for once. I really do. Like we just went through something where we're pretty high on the Bears. Like the exercises we went through the overall record, talking through everything. That's allowed to be pretty high. But for once, I want to set the bar low and see the team overachieve it. I don't care if it's 1 year. Give me even 1 year. Like if you asked me right now, Nick, I'm one of the only people that would take this deal. If you said, Robert, you have a choice between 10 years of 10 wins minimum, but you'll never win the Super Bowl. You may win playoff games. Maybe you won't. But you'll never win the Super Bowl, but you'll get 10 years of winning football. Or 9 years of being a bottom 5 team with a Super Bowl championship somewhere in the middle of it. Kind of out of nowhere. That last one sounds terrible. Time passes too slowly, man. It's been too long since I watched the Bears play a game. Let alone if you tried to ask me about what it was like to be at week 1, where my son had just been born. He's 1 now, right? Like a year's a long time. That's almost the pull quote that I would stick with. And if I got to choose, I just want the Bears to give us a fun football season. That's what it's about, right?
I agree.
It is about entertainment at the end of the day. Entertain us. It should be fun. It really should be. But if the Packers are the team where everything should go wrong and it doesn't, the Bears lately have been the team where everything should go better, but it doesn't. And so they need to break the trend. Reverse the curse, Nick. Reverse the curse.
I mean, come on. Like the odds have to realign at some point. And again, I live in Wisconsin in my lifetime. And if they don't, it's going to be super painful. But I think we've been doing this podcast for like 2.5 hours, haven't we?
It's 2 hours and 20 minutes specifically.
So if you're still with us, we love you. Okay.
Yes.
Let us know, give us follows, what you guys want out of this podcast too, because we'll, ask questions of you guys. We want to deliver a product that you guys want. So hit us up on Twitter. It'll be a lot of fun this year.
Yeah, I know we're going to get at least one comment after what I'm right about to say about how, no, it's not too long. It's a little too long. And that's okay. But split this one up over multiple days. I mean, this one is one that I think, Nick, you and I are really proud of. We didn't stop the conversation, and that was an intentional thing. Why derail something that we think is good? We believe in this, and we really want to put together the best Bears podcast that we can. So do comment if you like it. Subscribe to whatever podcasting app you prefer. If we're not on your favorite podcasting app, shout at me on Twitter or yell at me in the YouTube comments. I listen to things that shout at me, unfortunately. But so we love you guys. Thanks so much for hanging with us. Bear down, and we'll see you next time.